There are days like these, birds chirping, warm rays of the sun, and a breeze coming through the crack in the window. In the morning when you wake up refreshed after a deep, dreamless sleep, and it seems like everything will go like clockwork. And everything around was just waiting for this moment to open up, to sparkle with colors and sounds, and the day promises to be successful and pleasant. It was a moment of quiet harmony, a feeling of happiness and confidence in her heart, and Jane never expected to hear a proposal for divorce. However, her husband, named Euclid Rudion, who was the head of the duchy, suddenly announced his desire for a divorce. This news took her by surprise, and at first our heroine thought that she had misheard or misunderstood his words. But looking into his eyes, she saw determination, and although his voice sounded uncertain, the desire to break their union was obvious. He confirmed his intention once again, gently but firmly, as if trying to convince her that this decision was final. At that moment, her heart was filled with a mixture of shock, bewilderment, and indignation. It seemed as if the whole world around her had turned upside down. She felt the light morning calm disappear, giving way to growing inner unrest. It showed on her face, and she thought that she might frighten him if she continued to sit there with such a frightening look. Relaxing her facial muscles, Lady Rudian looked at him and asked if he was seriously asking for a divorce now. Continuing, she added that, for his information, she was not one of those stubborn people who considered honesty to be the only virtue. There was a hint of irony in her gaze, and complete confidence in her words that sometimes a lie for the good is completely justified. She pointed out that, given what had been said, he most likely would not be able to answer her, because sometimes you need to leave some room to maneuver. The Duke listened silently, without interrupting, then put the documents in front of her, looked straight into her eyes, and declared that he was serious and had prepared everything. His voice sounded serious and decisive, as if he had already weighed the pros and cons and decided that this step was the only one of all the options. She carefully took the documents and began to slowly sort through them. Every word was written in his neat handwriting and even signed. While I was reading, thoughts were running through my head, wondering what could have prompted such a decision, what the problem was. She tried so hard to make him happy. Sitting still, she became lost in thought, realizing that his motives might be more complex and deeper than they seemed at first glance. This gave her a modicum of confidence not to rush to conclusions, but his words, "Please read slowly," threw her off balance. Slowly tearing apart the documents, Jane voiced her decision, saying that this was out of the question and nothing would come of it. Finally, with an expression of great inflexibility, she threw the scraps of documents straight into his face, and the paper mess flew into the air, symbolizing her final decision that she would not let him destroy their past and future so easily, and asked him to take it away. Euclid asked her to stop and think it over again, and she noted that normally she would have been taken aback by his shocked expression. But not today and not now. A strong confidence in her own rightness and strength to resist any pressure grew within her. Could anyone really have thought that she got into this affair only so that she could stupidly go and get a divorce? She knew the value of dignity and her love, and she was not going to give up so easily, even if the circumstances seemed hopeless. Her grandmother, who was fond of fortune-telling, said, as soon as she saw her in the cradle, that she would find money even if she fell on her back. The father, disappointed by the birth of his daughter, did not believe the prophecy and initially claimed that he was lucky due to his abilities. But after her birth, his affairs went uphill, and he became domineering and arrogant, and tired of his antics, his mother took her and left. And as soon as she left home, her father's business, into which he had invested his entire fortune, began to rapidly collapse. Mired in debt to relatives and friends, the father hastily found them and began to persuade her mother to return to him. Jane didn't have any good memories of him, but he kept coming and bothering them, so she and her mother had to move back. And as soon as she crossed the threshold, her father's business began to improve again, and in less than a month, he had paid off his debts and was successful again. But the peaceful time did not last long. Her parents died in an accident, and her grandmother, who protected her from greedy relatives, died when she grew up. Our heroine was already an adult, so she headed an investment company and finally understood her grandmother's words. She was truly born with a gift for attracting money, lottery wins were inevitable, and every investment brought in income. But this did not bring happiness. No matter how much she earned, it was not enough for her, and all that was left with her was money and people who wanted to take it away. Having ultimately lost faith in humanity and given up on relationships, our heroine found solace in a chance romance. It was a web novel called The Saint's Dangerous Choice, and in that life she began reading it voraciously, not missing a single chapter. Since there were no men in reality that she could trust, she chose the fictional character Euclid. The novel's genre was a reverse harem, with the crown prince, the high priest, and the head of the Assassin's Guild vying for the hand of the main character, Melissa. But she fell in love not with the main characters, but with the head of the duchy, Euclid Rudion, although she herself understood that her choice was strange. The problem was that her favorite wasn't even a minor protagonist, but a character who quickly disappears from the story. She wondered why no one had seen the true value of this good man, because he shone like a diamond among dangerous men. She was even curious herself as to why she had clearly failed in choosing her favorite character while successfully investing in stocks. The series had over 300 chapters and a bunch of other characters, a bunch of illustrations, but Euclid only had one, and she drew a different image. She wrote to the author asking him to write an epilogue or a separate story about Euclid, promising to give him as much money as he asked for. When our heroine sent this letter, she didn't really expect any response, but one came, and she thought that not even a minute had passed before she received an answer, although she considered herself only an ordinary reader. Opening it, she even thought that perhaps this was a polite request not to joke like that anymore, or some other kind of formal reply. But the moment she opened the letter, everything went white before her eyes, her strength left her, and she fell into darkness. When she came to and opened her eyes, she could not understand what had happened to her. At first it seemed to her that she had simply dozed off. Looking around, she was confused, because this place was completely unfamiliar to her, and everything she saw was for the first time. The walls, the furniture, even the smallest details seemed alien, and my heart began to beat faster with a vague feeling of anxiety and confusion. She wanted to understand how she ended up in this place and figure out what was going on. Her heart was filled with excitement, and she tried to remember even the smallest details to shed light on her situation. Looking at her reflection, she saw a strange face, framed by jet black hair and violet eyes. This face definitely belonged to the villainous Jane Basil from the novel, who goes crazy over the crown prince and divorces Euclid. She couldn't understand how it happened, whether she had ended up in Jane's body, and why she had bandages on her head. She decided that she should first sort out the situation, and she remembered that when the response from the author came, there was a flash of light. This made her think that she was dead, but she immediately dismissed this option. She felt too good to be dead. Our heroine, of course, was not in perfect health. The bandages on her head reminded her of this, and she thought that she was still simply sleeping. At that moment, a completely unfamiliar girl entered the room and asked if her mistress had woken up and if everything was okay. It was a common question, but our heroine was stumped and even a little frightened by this whole situation. First, she decided to find out who this girl was, so she asked a direct question, and she answered that her name was Anne. Hearing this name, she realized who was in front of her. It was the servant and right hand of Jane, the heroine of the novel. And she almost lost consciousness again when she realized that what she had only previously read about in books was happening to her in reality. Meanwhile, the maid asked her not to overexert herself because she had not yet fully recovered, and Jane became thoughtful. She needed to figure out what had happened, but she didn't even have an answer to the first question of how she ended up here. With the second, although reluctantly, she mentally agreed somehow she ended up in the world of the dangerous choice of a saint. And since she ended up in the body of the villain Jane, didn't that mean that she became the wife of her beloved Euclid and could take advantage of this? Dazzlingly bright hair, as if cast from pure gold, and eyes shining like the sun, such was the gentle and tender Euclid. In the original, the role of the head of the ducal house, Rudion, was insignificant, but our heroine remembered him. For her, he became the most beloved man. He didn't have official merch, so she had to make it herself. Now she was here and couldn't believe her luck, because she had been reborn as Jane, Euclid's wife. She was, however, bothered by the fact that in the original story they get divorced, and she didn't want that at all. At first she was even upset, but then she thought that she was not the real Jane, and she could try to change the course of events. Although she was lucky with money, that life was unbearably boring, and she was given a unique chance to remain the wife of her favorite. She had the opportunity to see this story with her own eyes, where the main character would be Euclid, just as she dreamed. Having decided on a plan, I thought it would now be nice to know exactly what point in the plot I am at now. And the only person who could help her with this was her maid, so she asked where she got this wound on her head. Surprised that the lady did not remember this, she said that the Crown Prince proposed to Lady Melissa. Hearing this, Jane thought that if the Crown Prince proposed to the main character, then this was the very beginning of the novel. She searched her memory and remembered that although that Jane had a bad temper, she had not yet started bullying Melissa. Anne said that when the lady heard the news, she became so angry that she hit her head on the wall in the Duke's office. Our heroine already knew that in the original she would throw a fit for any reason, but to cripple herself right in the Duke's office. She thought that the most Jane would do was go on a hunger strike or lock herself in her room, but now she saw that this lady had no breaks at all. However, it was precisely because of these antics that the Crown Prince began to despise her, and she had the opportunity to marry Euclid. She thought that her character could not be so easily corrected, but she could take back her words and told Anne that she needed to see the Duke. An idea came to her mind. She would go to him right now and tell him that she was no longer obsessed with the Crown Prince. The maid tried to stop her, but our heroine was adamant, although she did not know some of the nuances. And so she didn't expect such a turn of events, but that was only half the trouble. She saw what was blocking her exit. She couldn't even imagine that she would feel so bad that in her past life, and now her phobia hasn't gone away. Anne tried to calm her down while explaining to her mistress that she was under house arrest and was not allowed to go out. Then she scolded the guards for daring to point a gun at the lady and shouted at them to put it away immediately. Judging by the maid's reaction, our heroine realized that she knew that she had ichmophobia and was afraid of any sharp objects. Having calmed down a little, she thought that now it didn't matter anymore in any case. The guards wouldn't let her go anywhere without an order. It was an unpleasant situation, but she understood that now she could not influence it in any way, and she could only accept it. Apologizing for not telling her earlier, the maid added that when the lady fainted, the Duke ordered her to be placed under arrest. After replying that it was no big deal, Jane asked if Anne could arrange a meeting with her father because she needed to talk to him. Seeing the maid's reaction, she realized that she had made a mistake, because that Jane never called the Duke her father, and, having corrected herself, she added that she was talking about Duke Basil, who didn't even visit his daughter, who had smashed her head against the wall. Then Anne replied that the lady was mistaken. The Duke was horrified when she lost consciousness. He was simply not at home now. She explained that the Lord had business at the guild, and he and the young master had urgently left for the north. Our Jane thought that he probably went to look for his son-in-law under the pretext of guild business, because that's where he would meet her favorite. The maid's question discouraged her. She knew nothing about the man in the basement and did not understand why she should worry about him. Anne said that the mistress ordered to feed him only when she herself said so, and apparently now she is worried whether he has been hungry during this time. But there was no need to worry, because Anne saw Melissa sneak into the outbuilding yesterday and take care of him. Thinking that they knew nothing, but as the mistress had ordered, the maid pretended not to notice anything. Only then did our heroine realize that she had completely forgotten about him, and at that moment he was locked in the basement and things wouldn't work out anyway. A plan instantly formed in her head, and she asked the maid to bring the rope as quickly as possible. She understood that it was not her best decision, but at the moment she saw no other way out. She needed to hurry. The maid even made a timid attempt to stop her, saying that if she had known what the rope was for, she would never have brought it. Then she asked if the owner would definitely go alone, and Jane asked her not to worry, promising to return quickly. As I was going down, I wondered why Jane wore such high heels, since she was already quite tall, and it didn't matter that beauty required sacrifice. However, right now she was more concerned about that man in the basement, and she prayed that Jane had not yet managed to do the same thing. When I felt solid ground under my feet, I thought that I had miraculously descended, thinking only about the wedding with my beloved. Anne asked her to be careful and take care of herself, and she replied that she would be fine and not to worry. But it was chilly outside, and almost immediately our heroine realized that she had made a mistake in not thinking to put on something warmer. After all, she might catch a cold, but now it was too late, and she went to look for an extension. Her steps were cautious because she did not know the location of the building at all and walked by intuition. The novel didn't say much about it, but she knew that the guard change was supposed to be happening right now, and that was to her advantage. Thinking that now was the perfect moment, she walked faster, but almost immediately slowed down because she heard footsteps. She listened with alarm. Most of all, she was afraid that he might run away, and perhaps it was he. But seeing the figure, well lit by the moonlight, she breathed a sigh of relief, because it was definitely not him. A lady walked along the path, graceful and calm, like the moon itself, illuminating him with a quiet light. It was Melissa, the main character of A Dangerous Choice, who, after the Basil family moves, accidentally discovers that Richard is locked in the outbuilding. Shocked by his dire condition, Melissa secretly brought him food and medicine to ease his suffering. Watching the young lady go, I thought that if I had been reborn a little earlier, I would not have done such things. And she would never have bought him on the black slave market, and she would never have allowed him to meet the main character of the novel. At the moment, she was not indifferent to Melissa's feelings, but she could no longer fix this, although she was sorry. But at least she could have avoided doing other things and messing things up like the real Jane did, who, in her impulsive impulses, often rushed and acted at random, risking getting herself into trouble. At last she saw him and her heart was lifted. He was still in the dungeon where her predecessor had put him. He made a very gloomy impression on her. His face was distorted by shadow, and his eyes were full of sadness and fatigue. It was as if all his hopes and strength had been exhausted in captivity, and looking at him now, it was hard to imagine that he had a leading role. His name was Richard, and he was one of the main characters in the novel The Saint's Choice. However, the title spoke for itself, and all the male characters in this world are not all there, and Richard is the most dangerous of them. He lived his entire life as a slave, hiding the secret of his birth, and, being emotionally broken, was bought by Jane and locked away. It was here that he met Melissa, and for the first time, having received warmth and care from someone, Richard experienced the feeling of love. Later, having escaped from the annex and become the master of the criminal underworld, he desired revenge on Jane, and his love grew into an obsession. However, Melissa was so blind that Richard did not even hesitate to kidnap and imprison his victims. Melissa, who liked kind men, was not suited to him, and Jane, who was devoted only to Euclid, did not particularly like him. She noted that he was more interesting in person than in the illustrations, and it was no wonder he had such a strong fan base. Richard said that he had heard that she was ill, that she had fainted and would not be able to come to him for several days. Jane found herself thinking he would want to kill her on the spot, but he looked like he was worried about her. As if it wasn't she who disgusted him, but he who disgusted her, as if he wasn't her sworn enemy, and she was confused. He looked at her with his doe eyes, and she thought with relief that his eyes were still intact. I remembered the real reason why Jane bought him. It was the color of his eyes, which were like the crown prince's. So when the heir rejected her and proposed to Melissa, Jane, overcome with rage, wanted to tear out those very eyes. I thought that maybe that Jane just wanted to get pretty eyes, but in all cases she was not herself. Now she had the opportunity to let him go while he was still alive, and noticed the slave mark on the back of his hand. She wondered if he had hated her from the moment he was dragged here, since only his eyes hadn't been touched yet. She became scared when she imagined that if this were the case, and even if he gained freedom, he might try to kill her that very minute. She tried to calm down and not panic, because she had a protective artifact that she took from Anne just in case. And most importantly, if she doesn't let him go now, she might later meet Richard, who will already be a killer. Therefore, she decided to let him go and hope that not all was lost for him, and perhaps a different fate awaited him. She handed him the keys and was about to say something polite, but her hand suddenly jerked and the keys slipped out. She even said the phrase that this could free him from his shackles in confusion, as if she really were a villain. It was as if she was trying to humiliate him, and she felt embarrassed by her clumsiness and how stupid everything turned out at that moment. At that moment, she thought that sometimes the smallest failures can become the beginning of something more important and sincere. But she shouldn't embarrass him with her importunity, and she decided to go and look for his things while he removed the shackles. The original mentioned that she kept them somewhere nearby, although our heroine didn't quite understand why they were kept. She did find his clothes in the box, and they weren't the best she could offer him, but there was nothing else. My heart sank at the thought that he would have to wear something so worn or old, but I couldn't give him anything more worthy. However, she knew that there was at least the slightest bit of care and support in it, and that was more important than anything else. She also gave him some money to get him started, and said that he was now free and had no reason to stay there any longer. But he didn't move from the spot. He froze, as if thinking about something important in his gaze. She read a reluctance to leave. The words were spoken clearly, but there was a sense of uncertainty, and she wondered if he was making that face because he was expecting an apology. Then she asked him to forgive her for everything that had happened, and added that it now sounded a little suspicious and inappropriate. She took a deep breath and continued that she was truly sorry that she had bought him, locked him here, and caused him so much pain. Her voice trembled, and her eyes were filled with genuine regret, as if she was trying to atone for a long-accumulated feeling of guilt. She explained that the bag contained gold and precious stones, and that this should be enough for him to settle anywhere. And she repeated that he was free, but he continued to stand in front of her and remain silent, so she no longer knew what to think. She hoped that this would be enough for him to forgive her, and she wondered if perhaps she should have given him some more medication, because she was worried about him, because he suffered so much thanks to Jane, and she was trying to correct someone else's mistake. She thought he should thank her for the freedom she had given him and leave, but instead he suddenly asked why he had to leave. And when he also started crying, our heroine was completely confused. This was not the reaction she expected. His voice sounded so sincere and vulnerable when he asked for permission to stay that she froze. Falling on his knees before her, he called her mistress and asked if she was throwing him out because he did not call her mistress. All the words she had intended to say now seemed insignificant in comparison to this sincere cry. Richard, through tears and in a broken voice, continued that he was wrong and begged her not to throw him away. She felt a growing conflict and sympathy and confusion inside her that she couldn't ignore, and I thought that now he must be 18 and 4 years younger than Jane, essentially still a child. He has been a slave all his life, so the fear of freedom overpowers his joy, and it seems to him that he is simply being abandoned. However, she could not leave him here, and he, apparently realizing that she would not change her mind, cried for a long time. Eventually, seeing no reaction from her, Richard resigned himself to her choice and left the basement himself. But this situation could not leave her indifferent, and she felt guilty, although Jane had locked him in, and she had only let him go. The thought occurred to her that she had never imagined that he would actually turn out like this, even after reading the novel several times. Then she thought that she had done everything right, and she couldn't continue to keep him around because of a moment of pity. Even if she hadn't let him out, he would have still gotten out on his own, and would have become the head of a huge guild of assassins. He'll probably follow the original plot for revenge, and our heroine thought, let him do what he wants. Let her go her own way, but if so, then let him at least save her from this fate by excluding her from his list of victims. Having finished this task, she decided that it was time to return, but at that moment, she suddenly heard a call. Someone's voice came from behind her, her heart began to beat sharply, and she frantically tried to collect herself, wondering how it had happened that someone had noticed her. After all, she had just checked the patrol times and the night's routes, and knew exactly when and where to expect them. She was overcome with anxiety. She understood the danger of the situation. If they found out that she had violated the arrest, she could be severely punished. Panic was boiling inside her, but then she looked closer at his face, looked at the black hair and blue eyes like Jane's. This man, who looked like an imperial knight, was definitely the second son of Duke Basil. Looking at her sternly, Alex said that he had heard that she was under house arrest and did not understand why she was hanging around here. Then he asked whether her father's orders were now an empty sound to her, and his voice sounded cold and stern. Our heroine had hoped to slip away quietly, but she had to get caught like that, and by him, no less. He continued, meanwhile, that he heard that she had gone crazy and was banging her head against the wall, and asked if she had really gone crazy. She didn't answer. Then he asked in surprise why she was silent. He thought that she would throw a tantrum as usual. She asked again in a calm tone, went crazy, and added that he had given his knightly oath to a passing mongrel. Thinking that this guy had been rude from the very beginning, I asked what kind of tone he was using in his conversation with his older sister. Taking a didactic tone, our heroine was about to continue, but her brother interrupted her and asked why she had called herself a sister. Then she wondered why he suddenly asked, so surprised if Jane wasn't 2 years older than Alex. She asked out loud if she had said something wrong, and he replied that before it had made her sick whenever he called her sister. And since when did she start addressing him as a brother? And he added that she must have really gone crazy. Realizing that she had been scared for nothing, thinking that she had said too much, she said that she had hit herself and lost consciousness, so now she was not okay. Having said that, since he had just arrived, she mentally asked him to leave. If they found out that she had violated the arrest, they would punish her severely. She asked him out loud not to pretend that he cared, and again got scared because she answered too harshly. However, he looked at her like a ram at a new gate and was silent. Then she began to get nervous. She did not understand what was happening. She tried to figure out why he was silent. It would have been easier for her if he had yelled, gotten angry, in general, done something. At that moment, she felt a tickling in her nose, and it threatened that she might sneeze, and that was not the time. She thought that if she sneezed now, it would be the end of Jane's reputation, and our heroine could not afford that. But it got even worse trying to hold back a sneeze. She involuntarily made a sound that was more like a sob. In order not to embarrass herself even more in front of her brother, she said that she was going back to her place and that he should not follow her. As a result, the younger brother was left on the street trying to understand what happened, whether she really burst into tears from resentment. When the next morning arrived, our heroine was already sneezing and running a runny nose. She definitely had a cold. This was completely inopportune. She still had a bruise on her head, and then this happened. In short, her mood had been ruined since the morning. I thought that if I had known I would catch a cold, I would have dressed warmer yesterday, and with this thought, I went to the window. There was some commotion there, and she wondered why everyone had come out into the street, the servants, and even Melissa. Then she began to take a closer look at the young man next to her, and was even surprised that she couldn't immediately recognize her own brother. She wondered what Alex was doing there, but seeing his facial expressions, she thought it was just funny. After all, it's she who is under house arrest, not him, but he has never even visited her, so why is he so angry? Continuing her observation, our heroine saw someone getting out of the carriage, and judging by the fact that everyone was bowing, it was the Duke. She understood that she would definitely have to meet him, but just the thought of it made her very nervous. Because I was worried that I might blurt something out, then I saw that the Duke had given some kind of order and apparently it was urgent. When the maid ran into the room and said that the Duke was waiting for her, she realized that this urgent matter seemed to be hers. In fact, it was even better this way, because if she wanted to meet with Euclid faster, she needed to talk to her father. From the original, she knew that Duke Basil, the owner of this estate and his power in the empire, was second only to the emperor. He was rumored to be a cold-blooded and ruthless politician, as well as a cutthroat merchant who knew no compassion. His gaze makes you feel as if you are standing on thin ice, and his voice, like an abyss, suppresses any will to resist. And from this man, our heroine had to receive consent to marry Euclid so that she could then enjoy happiness. Anne, meanwhile, said that he was probably interested in her affairs, and having learned that she was his daughter's personal servant, ordered her to be called. She was curious how the Duke remembered a simple servant like her, and added that he seemed very worried about Jane. Our heroine replied that if someone smashes their head against the wall in front of you, even your sworn enemy would be worried. The maid was worried that the lady's fever had not yet subsided, so she asked if perhaps she could visit the Duke a little later. But Jane didn't want to put off this conversation, so she said that she was fine and she'd better go now. At the door, she noticed the knight whom she had convinced to remain silent with threats the day before, upon returning from a walk. Having figured that he was unlikely to betray, she nevertheless decided to make sure and asked his name. The knight introduced himself as Gressel Pion. This name seemed familiar to our heroine. She had heard it somewhere, but she couldn't remember where exactly. Smiling sweetly, she said that if the Duke asked about him, she would answer that he had conscientiously guarded her chambers. In gratitude, the knight bowed and thought that yesterday he had made the right decision and had won the lady's favor. The maid also assessed Jay's behavior in the same way and asked whether the lady apparently took a liking to this young knight. Then she continued that they needed someone for that job and asked if she should take it on. Our heroine knew nothing about any plan, but since she couldn't admit it, she decided that she should just play along. Having given her consent, our heroine thought that in time Anne would introduce her to the course of the matter, and she would find out what was being discussed. She was already very worried about the upcoming conversation with her father, and then she saw Alex in front of the office door. Unable to resist, she asked what he was doing there, and when he remained silent, she repeated why he was there. To his astonished question that he shouldn't be here, she replied that he should be serving in the Imperial Order and not at home. Not understanding his reaction, she decided to press a little and asked him more provocatively if he had completely relaxed. And it worked. My brother got angry and replied that he had relaxed, he had been on training for a week, and it was his first day of vacation. Then he added more calmly that, besides, he had only returned yesterday, and then such news came, it turns out that Jane had fainted. Our heroine was completely at a loss. She again had the unpleasant feeling that she was doing something wrong. In response, Alex quietly shouted that he hadn't told his father that she had been wandering around all over the place yesterday, and asked her to sit quietly and not show herself. It occurred to the present Jane to ask him to explain his behavior, but before she could do so, the office door opened. The young man sternly asked if they even realized where they were to stage all this nonsense. Alex began to justify himself, calling him his brother and adding that it was simple, but he was interrupted and not allowed to finish. At that moment, our heroine put two and two together and realized that it was Cyanal's older brother Basil, who was standing in front of her. He was the Duke's eldest son. He looked older than Alex, and the aura emanating from him was significantly colder. Feeling that chill, she thought that something was wrong again, just like that time she saw Richard in the basement. Even without the memories of that Jane, she could clearly feel her emotions, and this realization made her a little uneasy. She felt an inexplicable sense of unease, and at the mere sight of him she was overcome with an inexplicable aversion. Cyanal said that if she was going to throw a tantrum like last time, then she should leave. She wouldn't achieve anything anyway. When she said she wasn't going to make a scene, he asked why she was there then, since she was still under house arrest. Drowning out the unpleasant feelings inside, she said that she had an urgent conversation with her father, which is why she came now. The older brother looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and amazement, and then squeezed out a question about what she had just said. At that moment, her father's voice was heard from the office. He asked her to come in, then Cyanal started talking about the fact that she was still under arrest. Then the Duke, raising his voice a little, repeated that she could come in, adding that he had made his wish quite clear. Cyanal watched the Duke with concern, realizing that his insistent demand might mean something important. No one on the estate would even think of disobeying the Duke, knowing how stern and demanding he was. At that moment, our heroine thought that it was more difficult for her than for her brothers, because unlike them, she did not know her father. All she could do in this situation was stick to her plan and focus on the feelings of that Jane. There were no illustrations of him in the original, and in life he looked even colder and more severe than in the description, and she didn't know what to do. Duke Basil seemed more frightening to her than she thought, and besides, it was he who put her under house arrest. And if she blurts out something wrong, won't he send her away? Although if you think about it, it's unfair there. It was that Jane who caused the disturbance, but she had to endure this kind of treatment, and she had only one reason to endure all of this. Thinking that all this was for the sake of marriage with her beloved Euclid, our heroine suddenly burst into tears, and her father barked her name. The elder brother, seeing her tears, was surprised he could not remember a time when she allowed herself to cry in front of others. She thought that maybe these were residual emotions of that Jane, and that she, of course, was offended, but not to that extent. There was silence in the office, and she could hear the clock on her father's desk counting down the seconds. Then the Duke's footsteps echoed, and he was already nearby. Then she thought that he was not at all what she had imagined. He asked her to wipe away her tears, and she appreciated his gesture, and it was not the Duke she saw in the original. He said he heard she was feeling better, but apparently he was wrong, and then he apologized for calling her today. Looking into his face, our heroine caught herself thinking that the man in front of her was an ordinary father who was worried about his daughter. And it was stupid for her to worry that she would be sent into exile, and perhaps she had misunderstood everything and was therefore making mistakes. But in any case, in order to meet with Euclid, she needs to talk to the Duke about her marriage. And she asked for forgiveness, calling him father. Then he asked again what she had just said, but she again did not understand what he meant. That's why she said he must have been really scared when she caused a ruckus in the office and promised not to do it again. Then she spoke about what she had come for and said that she was giving up the crown prince, and he asked if it was true. She replied that she also had pride, because knowing about her feelings, he proposed to her cousin Melissa, and now she wants to find a man who will look only at her, and so she asks if they can find her a groom. Having spoken out, our heroine thought that although she was confused by the tears, it was even for the best, and her request sounded sincere. She then continued that she now wanted to give up her feelings for the crown prince, but was afraid that her resolve might waver. Therefore, in order not to do stupid things like before, she thought it would be better to get married as soon as possible. The older brother looked at her incredulously and asked if she was serious, to which she replied that it was the absolute truth. She and her brother can choose the candidate themselves. However, if possible, she would like to marry before the crown prince. Watching their reactions, I thought that they both had such expressions as if they didn't believe it and decided that I needed to press harder. And she said that the wedding did not necessarily have to be lavish. She just wanted to leave the capital as soon as possible, where the heir was. Her father exchanged glances with Cyanil, and she thought that nothing terrible would happen, such as a change of candidate. Therefore, she added that she believed that her father would find a worthy companion for her, but still, she wanted the family to not be of too low status. This remark upset the Duke a little, so he reminded her that she was still his daughter. He then continued that their family has pride, and he would never choose someone who is not their equal. She breathed a sigh of relief and thought that now that the conversation had taken place, she could calmly return to her place. However, she was confused by the Duke's lackluster, unenthusiastic reaction and decided that it was time to strike a decisive blow. Turning around, she called him Dad and added in a peaceable tone that she admitted she had been selfish. And she knows she behaved terribly towards her family, so she promises that it will not happen again. Our heroine knew why it wouldn't happen again. The reason was that the Jane they knew was no longer there. She couldn't tell them about it, but it didn't matter. She believed that with time they would get used to this Jane. And then she was going to marry her favorite and live a long and happy life with him far from her family. Her spirits were high, and she thought that all she had to do now was turn around gracefully and leave. However, she didn't succeed. Suddenly everything started to swim before her eyes, and the stream of vivid images merged into a haze of uncertainty. Jane felt a weakness creeping over her body, and everything became silent, as if the world had lost its colors, leaving only shadow and silence. As if in the distance, she heard Jane being called and forced to stand for a long time, not even knowing that she was feeling unwell. Judging by the voice, it was Alex, and her father asked him to be quiet and remove his hand. From the conversation, she understood that everyone was waiting for the doctor. The doctor said that these were symptoms of a cold, and so he first prescribed medication for the young lady. He went on to say that after a few days of rest, she would feel better, and that she should not worry so much. She would recover quickly. The Duke, looking around at everyone, asked why the child, who had not left the room, had suddenly caught a cold. Cyanil suggested that perhaps complications had arisen after the incident, but the maid said that was impossible. The Duke continued to ask why Jane was in such a state, and Anne replied that perhaps her body was very weak. Alex asked why they left, especially when she was sick, and added that she was disappointed when no one visited her. Anne added fuel to the fire by saying that what the lady had actually asked when she woke up was why the Duke had not come to her. Then she continued that when she told him that he was not there, the lady smiled as if she had resigned herself to it. When she finished speaking, everyone became quiet, each blaming themselves in their own way for the situation. Alex was the first to speak, saying that he had said that avoiding her until she cooled down was not an option, even if she didn't like them now. The Duke told his eldest son that she had been looking for him and was upset to learn that he had left the estate and gone north. He thought they were lucky when she didn't threaten to die, like last time, and she also called him father. Cyanil confirmed that he had heard it too, and what's more, she even called him brother, something she hadn't done for many years. Jane hated her family since childhood, and the only one she listened to was her mother, and after her death she often cried. But she never wanted to open her heart to any of her relatives, and suddenly this child said the words, father and brother. Her family assumed that since she had no serious health problems, the Crown Prince's proposal had shocked her too much. The Duke was also unhappy with the heir because their Jane was so wonderful, and how dare he do such a thing. I thought that, of course, her obsession was strange, but still, she was a precious daughter of the founding family. Sionel said that everything had worked out well in the end, and that he would immediately take up the matter of his sister's marriage. When my father clarified, he immediately replied that Jane was stubborn and capricious, and it was unknown when she might change her mind. Then he reminded his father that they had a suitable candidate in mind, so there was no point in delaying. My lord agreed with his son, so he said that everything was correct, and if we were talking about a family worthy of them, then it was, perhaps, Rudion. Thus, our heroine achieved her goal, and after some time, Euclid received a letter from the Basil family estate. And in his estate, Duke Rudion, a serious conversation took place between the owner and his assistant Delano. Euclid asked what was the matter, and he answered that it was simply an unthinkable desire to marry the daughter of Duke Basil. Doesn't the gentleman know how terrible her reputation is, and why he would want to be related to her family by blood? Besides, that's not all. The whole country knows that Jane is in love with the crown prince, and the gentleman will always play second fiddle. The Duke asked if Delano knew how much money they had to pay Count Bursay this month. When he answered, Euclid said that if they didn't pay, the Count's merchant guild would raise prices to the sky. And the problem is not only in the fees they pay for transporting the Count, but also in the debts that have accumulated over many years. At the moment, they are paying only small interest, but the situation may change, so he is obliged to enter into this marriage. Delano repeated that he was against it, and Euclid said that, contrary to rumors, the Duke seemed to the assistant to be a worthy man. Moreover, he asked not to have any illusions. The expansion of the trade guild to their lands would not bring any benefit to Basil. Despite the lack of benefits, they agreed to marry and also hand over a huge fortune as a dowry. As for the rumors circulating among the people, they say that the gossip about the relationship between Basil's daughter and the crown prince is a lie. But even if Lady Jane has feelings for the heir, it doesn't matter to him, he added very quietly, because he... Then he called the butler and gave him the order to prepare everything for the trip to the capital and to do it as soon as possible. Delano wanted to put forward more arguments against it, but the gentleman had already made up his mind and was not going to discuss it further. So he told his assistant that that was all, and added that he probably had a lot of other things to do, so he could go. He even smiled goodbye, so that Delano wouldn't have any urge to stay and try to dissuade him. But he had no desire to discuss his affairs with anyone, and did not plan to involve those close to him in his problems. Euclid, to his regret, had already learned some time ago that his health had deteriorated significantly, and all the doctors he consulted on this issue did not give him a comforting prognosis. Each of them only confirmed that his condition was quite serious and most likely irreversible. Despite all his attempts to find a way out, he felt the shadow of inevitable death looming ever larger over him. Remembering the words about the Duke's daughter having feelings for the Crown Prince, I thought that this was even for the best. Days passed and our heroine recovered, but they continued to stuff her with drugs that were already too much for her. Now the maid came and brought another portion, but Jane continued to humbly play her role. She kept wondering what had gotten into everyone. You'd think she was deathly ill and coughing up blood. When asked if it was necessary to watch her so closely, Anne replied that the Duke had ordered that they make sure she took her medicine. Then she thought sadly that apparently she had not managed to dispel that misunderstanding. A week ago, our heroine woke up and saw her worried relatives in full force. They asked her how she was feeling, but she couldn't figure out what they were all doing in her room. She managed to shame them a little, and when they all cooled down, her father asked her for forgiveness for that incident. He explained that he had to leave on urgent business, and he didn't think that she would be sad when she opened her eyes alone. Jane didn't even immediately understand what the Duke meant, and then she guessed that it was because she had burst into tears in front of him. Then our heroine said that everything was completely wrong, and she was not sad at all, and not even the least bit offended. She looked at their faces and realized that they were again misunderstanding her words and knew how to explain it to them. But the maid shut her mouth with candy, and her father said for some reason that she had always been so brave. After thinking about the situation, she thought that this was better than indifference, and then Anne remembered that Melissa had asked to meet with her. The maid continued by telling her that her mistress was still ill and asked what she would be ordered to do now. Jane felt much better, so she decided not to refuse a little tea party in the fresh air. Melissa thanked her cousin for agreeing, and Jane replied that it was not worth it, because it would even do her good. Looking at the light wheat hair and eyes of young foliage, I thought that my cousin was so naive and charming. She was convinced every time that Melissa was like a princess from a fairy tale, and not at all unlike the rest of the Basil family. However, her cousin still didn't get down to business, so Jane asked what exactly she wanted to discuss with her. For some reason, this ordinary question made her interlocutor very nervous, so much so that the girl spilled her tea. This made her even more worried, because on top of everything else she had stained her sister's favorite tablecloth. After calming Melissa down, she wondered if she was too tense and was really so afraid of her reaction to the marriage proposal. And she said that if she was worried about the proposal that came from the imperial family, then there was no need. She shared that she no longer had feelings for the crown prince, so she didn't care whether her cousin accepted the proposal or not. In response, Melissa said that she remembered her words from earlier, and therefore she made the decision to refuse the offer herself. Our heroine became curious as to why the young lady was so shy in front of her today, and she asked about it. In response, I heard that she was looking around the mansion and accidentally wandered into the outbuilding, and then, for some unknown reason, went down to the basement. Jane hadn't expected Melissa to be the first to talk about Richard, and now she had to keep her quiet at any cost. Otherwise, it's unknown what could happen, so I asked out loud to forget everything my cousin saw and heard there. Then she added that there was no need to worry about that guy because she sent him to a good place. She explained that she had released him and given him enough money for the trip, and now he could take care of himself. Then, to change the subject, she asked how her cousin was getting on at the ducal estate, and she replied that everything was just wonderful. Jane knew Melissa wasn't allowed to leave the estate, so she suggested talking to her father, which he allowed. She said that if we go with security and to some safe place like a temple, then the Duke probably won't mind. And the cousin said that the temple is now preparing for a prayer meeting because the Crown Prince is soon leaving on a campaign. Now our heroine realized why Melissa's refusal was taken so quietly. It turns out it was all about the military campaign. When asked if the Crown Prince was truly obsessed with war, as is said, Jane had no answer, but she suggested that it was possible. After all, the first emperor was a great hero who slew a dragon, and perhaps his descendant inherited his warlike nature. Then the cousin said that this was probably why the Crown Prince became the youngest swordmaster, but she did not express her thought completely. The maid reported that the Crown Prince had just arrived at the mansion, and Jane thought that he was speaking of the devil. She thought he had come to talk to his sister, but Anne, even a little embarrassed, said that he wanted to see her. Wondering what he wanted from her, our heroine headed straight to the living room. Kaiden Elios, the Emperor's heir and one of the main characters vying for Melissa's heart. From the original, she knew that it was the obsession with this character that caused Jane's death. However, she could not have imagined that she would have to meet him so soon and, moreover, so suddenly. She stood for a couple of minutes at the living room door to collect her thoughts, because she could blurt out something again. He said that he didn't expect her to come so quickly, apparently. She was so eager to see him. Mentally calling him a self-righteous fool, I thought that in appearance he looked exactly like in the illustrations. Even while reading the novel, she considered him the ideal protagonist, but she never felt in love. And now, standing face to face, she realized that, rather the opposite, she felt something close to hatred or even anger. It occurred to her that perhaps, because of the Crown Prince's constant refusals, that Jane's love had turned into hatred. After she greeted His Highness, he said that enough greetings, let him rather say how her forehead was. He heard that she had banged her head against the wall in anger because of her cousin, and he hoped that it was not his fault. When she said he had nothing to worry about, he replied that how could he not worry, since everyone claimed she had done harm because of him. And the reason for this is that he proposed to Melissa, and there are also rumors that after she fainted, she began to behave strangely. Smiling at this formulation, she said that, on the contrary, she had finally come to her senses. Moreover, she decided to completely give up her feelings for him, and is also planning to marry someone else. Ignoring his reaction, she added that he wouldn't have to worry about her bothering him anymore. There was a note of royal anger in his voice as he asked if she was going to leave him and marry someone else. He had completely lost all control of his emotions as he continued, refusing the seat next to him and the title of Crown Princess. Then he asked her what she thought. Would he believe such nonsense, and who did she take him for, since he allowed himself to do such a thing? This wasn't the reaction Jane expected, but she didn't care. If he didn't want to believe it, that was his right. But why behave like that? When she asked him to let her go rather sharply, he asked what this new tactic was. He then added that this was still more original than threatening to commit suicide, but if she was lying, then she should do it more convincingly. As she began to reply that it was true and she had even already sent the proposal, she was distracted by a fly flying by. These annoying insects always irritated her, and she couldn't understand why he didn't notice her. Now Jane could think about how a swordmaster could not notice a buzzing insect right under his nose. And he continued that if this were true, then who in their right mind would agree to marry her under such circumstances? But because of this damn fly, she couldn't concentrate at all. The insect was so irritating. The Crown Prince said that even if such a madman were to be found, he knew for sure that she would not abandon him. She began to mentally plead with Kaiden to notice the buzzing, because she still couldn't understand a word he was saying. He continued that since we were talking about this, he would tell her right away and suggest that she not continue in the same spirit, because he won't accept her even as a lover, and at that moment our heroine got rid of the annoying fly. The situation was worse than ever. She was finally able to concentrate, and then his words began to reach her consciousness, as well as how she got rid of the harmful insect and realized with horror that she had screwed up badly. The Crown Prince stood opposite her, demanding an explanation, and that she could tell him that she had simply killed a fly on his face. Kaiden was also confused. She was a woman capable of shocking things, but he had never seen her confused, even when she shamelessly demanded a place next to him, confessing her love, or screaming and throwing tantrums. She had never been so bold or crossed the line, and he didn't understand what had happened now. He remembered flirting with other ladies or asking them to be his partners, while pointedly ignoring her. Of course, all these meetings were fleeting and without obligations, and Jane, having learned about it later, always settled everything herself. But today, everything was different. It was as if they had returned to the times when they first met as children. Then she had the same clear look of irritation or indifference on her face, and he couldn't believe that she had hit him. When he asked her about it, she thought that the Jane must have been shocked by his proposal not to her, but to Melissa. However, she treated it differently, especially since she could die because of it. She had no choice but to apologize. Then he thought that Jane had not changed completely, having realized the situation. She immediately humbled her pride. But this woman's simple apology was not enough for him. He had not yet received what he really wanted from her. The Crown Prince was very angry when there was a knock on the door and the news that it was high time for him to return to the palace. And for certain reasons he couldn't ignore it now, but he figured he would still have time to make up for it all. He also wanted to irritate her before saying goodbye, and he said that this time he was going on a hike and would not return for at least 3 months. He was curious to see how she would react to this, and he couldn't even figure out why Jane didn't look up. He considered this a good sign for himself, which meant his chances were still very high, and he would still win back. The Crown Prince could not have imagined that the handkerchief extended to him was given to Jane for completely different reasons. He thought that perhaps this was just ordinary concern or a display of politeness, but his gaze failed to hide his bewilderment. That's why he still asked her, who was now, in all seriousness, handing him a simple handkerchief. For some reason, at that moment she thought that such a light pink one, with lace, they probably like them like that. She still didn't have the courage to explain it to him, so she was glad when he said that he would accept him. He glanced at her and found himself thinking that she had no idea what her frightening indifference was doing to him. That her cold, violet eyes always reminded him of strong alcohol, which helped him endure long hikes. He turned away to hide his confusion from her because he felt that something else had come into it this time. It was an elusive feeling of unease that was lodged deep in his soul, and he would have to sort it out. Returning to her chambers, our heroine was beside herself, wondering if it was a joke that she had just hit the Crown Prince in the face. Having calmed down a little, she noted to herself that Kaiden was different from the image she knew from the original. She was worried about whether he would become interested in her person because of the slap. She wanted to hope that it would not come to that. This Crown Prince seemed strangely condescending to her, as if he saw something in her that she herself could not yet understand. She chuckled, remembering Melissa's scarf, but felt that in any case she had managed to sort everything out quite well. Alex said that every time he is convinced that training fights are hard work, no matter what others say. All he wanted now was to have dinner and go to rest, and he did not deny himself this. However, when he entered the dining room, he was stunned with surprise as to why the one who had been eating alone in her room suddenly found herself at the common table. Unable to resist, he asked, and our heroine answered whether it was really so strange that a family dined together. He thought to himself that, however, Alex had a right to be surprised the old Jane really never ate with everyone. She is only here because she found out the answer about marriage, and when she was offered to have dinner together, she simply joined. The Duke decided to clarify one more question, so he said that he knew that the Crown Prince had visited the estate today. After looking around at those present, he turned to his daughter and asked if the Crown Prince blamed her for Melissa's refusal. To which she calmly replied that no, she had not been particularly reproached, but she did not know from whom he had heard such news. And she said that Kaiden knew about the scandal she had caused in her father's office behind closed doors. When asked who had told him, she replied that she didn't know, but she did say that her feelings had cooled, but it seemed he didn't believe her. On the contrary, he told her not to even dream of becoming a mistress, let alone the title of Crown Princess. Alex almost jumped from such impudence, but his older brother asked him to be quieter and asked again about his mistress. He then said that even though he was a member of the imperial family, he could not tell an unmarried lady that she could become his mistress. It would be like trampling on their family's honor, so he would file an official protest with the imperial court tomorrow. But this wasn't the reaction she was looking for, and she said that there was no need to react that way, since she wouldn't remain in debt either. And when Jane said this, she knew that now she could no longer get out of it and would have to say that she had slapped His Highness. However, Alexa seemed to be even glad that it was she and not someone else who hit the Crown Prince. She apologized to everyone for what happened, and her father said that he would have been angrier if she had kept silent in that situation. The Duke added that the Crown Prince was a master swordsman, so her blow was nothing more than a mosquito bite for him. Jane continued that in any case it was better to hush everything up, because she just wanted to get married as soon as possible, even a day earlier. My lord replied that he had just wanted to talk about this, and that this was the main reason why he had proposed to dine together. The Duke asked with interest what he was talking about and replied that he had finally received an answer to his marriage proposal. Our heroine's heart almost stopped from excitement, and she tried with all her might to hide her feelings from others. She quietly asked if he accepted it, to which the father replied that of course, what normal man would not be happy to take her as his wife. Then the Duke continued that apparently the letter took so long to arrive because the groom sent it by regular mail. The founding family, which has produced outstanding mages for generations, does not own a single manna carriage. He added this in a surprised tone, and therefore said that when she went to Duke Rudion, he would prepare enough manna carriages. They also discussed that they would need more mana stones and more carriages, which would be needed when she came to the capital. My lord said that his daughter was prudent and had already chosen a carriage and a knight to accompany her after the wedding. Noticing her surprise, he explained that they said this was the knight who guarded her door during her house arrest. Our heroine realized that this was probably the very thing that the maid had promised to arrange. The Duke continued that they would probably be able to get along now, and he was thinking of holding only the engagement and postponing the wedding for a year. But Jane has already said that she wants to get married as soon as possible and does not need a lavish wedding. A modest one, surrounded by family, is acceptable. However, the Duke was against it, but his daughter insisted because she wanted to leave the capital before the Crown Prince returned from the campaign. Sighing, the father did not argue and said that if that's what she wanted, then she needed to immediately contact the temple. At this point, Alex intervened, saying that he didn't understand why everyone was talking about Jane's upcoming wedding. The elder brother replied that it was only because Jane had decided to get married and they had found a suitable groom for her. Then Alex asked who this groom was, to which his brother replied that it was Duke Rudion and that Jane agreed with this choice. The Duke's youngest son asked his cousin if she knew, and when he found out that everyone knew except him, he became angry. Therefore, with some resentment, he blurted out that they were making fun of him, that they hadn't told him alone, as if he wasn't a member of the family at all. After these words, he quickly retreated from the dining room, leaving behind a feeling of tension and genuine surprise. Because Alex suddenly lost his temper and left, everyone felt awkward, so they quickly finished dinner and dispersed. Our heroine couldn't understand why her brother got so angry and then ran away like a little offended child. Seeing the knight at the door, her thoughts jumped to him, because apparently it was he who would go with her to the Duchy of Rudion. Remembering his name, she thought again. She could not understand why it was so familiar to her. He dropped to one knee and apologized for his past disrespect, explaining that he had believed the rumors that had circulated about her. He continued, so when he was ordered to guard her doors, he honestly thought at first that he was out of luck. But she showed him mercy as boundless as the sea, so from now on he will devote his whole life to faithful service to her. Then she remembered that he, a minor character, had sacrificed his life to protect Jane when she rebelled. She didn't know what happened behind her back, since he spoke of mercy, but since she wasn't aware of the situation, she should be careful with her words. Having asked him to get up, she said that she would soon get married and go north, then asked if he was definitely not against going with her. Having answered in the affirmative, he added that he had left his homeland for the sake of his brother's treatment, so it was not a problem, but his brother would not be able to go. My brother was called a hostage, but he realized too late that in fact they made sure he could receive treatment here in peace. He added, almost crying, and how he hadn't realized this before, and she decided not to detain him any longer, telling him that he was free for today. So, completely unexpectedly for her, our heroine got a night bodyguard, which she never even thought about. She thought that Anne was no slouch, because in just a week she had found out everything about the man and brought a knight ready to swear allegiance. She thought that the mistress of such a servant was also not simple, and maybe that Jane was different from the one she knew from the novel. Then she asked the maid if she didn't find it strange and unexpected that she was marrying someone else. Anne replied that she had long been devoted to her mistress and that he could not read all her secret thoughts and intentions. However, she is confident that there is a good reason for this decision and believes that there were also important reasons for choosing Duke Rudion. Then the thought occurred to our heroine that the reason was quite simple. The fact was that there was another person in her mistress's body. The priest prayed in the deep silence of the empty church, his words and prayers echoing within the holy walls. And the only witnesses to his spiritual suffering were the shining moon standing outside the high windows. The wind whispered softly around him as he begged to be killed and asked if he would really save the world if he helped Jane Basil. Words were heard from behind that this would undermine his health, since he had already been praying all night and for several days in a row. The person entering thought that the priest Demian was a man whose faith had always been distinguished by its firmness and unwaveringness. And did he really see something so terrible that he looked so exhausted these last few days? The high priest asked what had brought the cleric there at such a late hour, and he replied that he had come to tell him something. A request has been received from the daughter of Duke Basil. She wishes to hold a wedding ceremony in the Great Temple. Demian said that he had heard about her obsession with the crown prince, but oddly enough, the groom was not the heir, but Duke Rudion. The priest was surprised by the priest's knowledge, but he did not tell how he learned all these details. He only said that he would soon announce the date of the ceremony and asked that this be conveyed to the family of Duke Basil so that they would wait. The priest understood that they were waiting for him to name the priest who would conduct the ceremony, and, without waiting for the question, said that he would do it personally. The next morning arrived, unremarkable in its appearance, with the sun rising quietly and the day beginning as calmly as all the previous ones. Our heroine came to Alex, who knew nothing about the upcoming wedding until the previous evening and was still sulking at everyone. Unable to bear it any longer, he said that she had come first, and now she was silent and staring at him, hoping that this would make him feel better. She said she wasn't staring at him, and he told her in response that she, who only had to get married and leave home, needed what from him. She asked him why he was saying that, and thought that she was certainly glad that she had received the marriage license faster than she expected. And if possible, I would like to live the rest of the time before the wedding in peace with everyone, without conflicts and misunderstandings. Having said that, he repeats that she not only didn't tell him, but also asked he will continue to be angry with his sister, who is about to get married. In response, he mumbled that he really didn't want to say this, but why did she treat him differently than others? She allows Melissa to call her sister in a friendly manner, but with him, why is she always so cold? And she asked him to explain why. although she guessed that the thing was that she allowed him to call her sister, but unfortunately she herself did not understand this. Our heroine even tried to gently ask Anne why that Jane hated the family so much, but she still didn't find out anything. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't understand it, and in the original, her childhood actions were not mentioned or explained at all. Memories of that Jane came back to her in fragments, and from them she knew that even as a child she had been cold to Alex. She stopped all his attempts to get closer to her, and sometimes even quite rudely, and did not allow him to call her his sister. He once asked her if he would call her dear sister, then she would not be angry, but she became even more angry. She didn't have any brothers or sisters in her past life, so she had nothing to compare it to what it was like to have them. With family who were always there to share her joys and worries, all she knew was loneliness and the need to rely only on herself. She told him that she would no longer make distinctions, and he could call her sister from that very moment on. When he asked if he was crazy and why he would call her that, she asked what she should do with him now. Burying his face back into the pillow, he asked if she thought that since she had allowed him to call her sister, he would immediately be happy. Then he said that, as a sign of reconciliation, if he returned safely from this campaign, he would be allowed to come to the Duke's castle. Jane asked again what it meant if I returned safely. Why invite trouble upon myself and talk about it in such a tone? Then the brother asked again. In any case, she invites him to the castle of Duke Rudian, to which our heroine gave her consent. And she said that she would not be able to come to the ceremony of triumphal return, and asked not to sulk, that she did not treat him like a brother. Alex replied that he would assume that she would come someday, but as it was, he hadn't even received a single handkerchief from her, which, by the way, is given even to complete strangers, and then saying, "Here you go," she handed him hers. This simple gesture could not leave him indifferent, and he felt a wave of warmth spread throughout his body. Having sincerely thanked her, he added that he never thought, never guessed, that he would ever live to see the day when he would receive such a thing from her. His joy was transmitted to her, and then she thought that it was not in vain that she had come to him, and now she could leave with a clear conscience. 3 days later, Duke Rudian was on his way to see his bride, and told Delano that it was his first time riding in a magic carriage. He also said that it was really fast and convenient, adding that he did not expect such care from Duke Basil. And he is sincerely grateful, to which the more skeptical assistant noted that it is not for nothing that this is a very rich family. However, the more he thinks, the more anxious he becomes, wondering what they are planning to give him so generously. The owner did not understand him. Then Delano explained that they had suddenly come to the north with a proposal to open a trade guild. Then they increased the dowry compared to what was promised, and now they are rushing with the wedding, which will be modest and without guests. Euclid replied that perhaps the bride was religious, and since it coincided with his business trip, perhaps they wanted to do everything quietly. Delano said it sounded more like a convenient excuse, but his master didn't like the idea, and the assistant asked if the Duke didn't find this strange, and perhaps there was a reason why it would not be possible to marry so soon. He was about to add something else, but Euclid stopped him and said that they were already engaged to the daughter of Duke Basil. He understands that he is saying this out of concern, but no matter how good his intentions are, he no longer wants to listen. Realizing that he had said too much and that he should not have so openly criticized his master's decision, Delano apologized. While they were talking, they didn't even notice how Duke Basil's estate appeared ahead, and they had already arrived at the place. Euclid still had a slight feeling of resentment about the conversation that had taken place, but he quickly got rid of it. He will soon see his bride, and it would be improper if the groom was in a foul mood at the first meeting. Our heroine went out to meet him and was terribly nervous, because very soon she would be able to see her favorite in person. One maid quietly asked why the mistress did not look like usual. The second replied that her makeup and dress were different. Anne knew the reason and was also very worried, although her mistress chose this image herself. And she didn't quite understand why Lady Jane was so nervous today. She had never seen her so excited. And the lady was truly excited to the limit. No joke, she was about to see Euclid, whom she had dreamed about in that world. Now, by the will of fate, she had the opportunity not only to see him, but also to become his fiancé. She had been nervous since the morning. Everything seemed wrong and out of place. She was worried about the slightest thing. And when I saw a pimple on my face, I almost lost consciousness, and this was before the legendary moment of the first meeting with my favorite. I thought with horror that I had tried so hard and taken special care of my skin just to become a little more beautiful. Seeing Anne, she asked him not to make a shocked face. She herself did not know why problems had arisen now that did not exist. The maid replied that it seemed that one of the masks she had made for her yesterday did not suit her, and our heroine sighed deeply. Anne dismissed her suggestion to simply squeeze it out, because it could only make things worse, and advised disguising it. Adding that she could do it perfectly, she asked for trust, and Jane, although she had doubts, still decided to agree. A few hours later, everyone came out to meet the groom. Cyanil glanced sideways at his sister several times. Something about her appearance struck him as strange and a little provocative, but he did not immediately dare to ask about it. Taking advantage of a moment when no one could hear them, he asked her what she had done, and she was amazed, not understanding what he was talking about. Then he asked again what she had done to her face. Couldn't she have asked the maid to get ready? Then he said that they were already late, and it was time for them to go, and the maids continued to discuss her new image in low voices. Our heroine didn't understand why there was such a fuss about her makeup, since Anne had covered it all up so carefully. The Manna carriage had already pulled in by then, and Jane could already hear its wheels rustling along the driveway. Jane tried to hide her worries, taking deep breaths and trying to remain calm, but inside she was seething with mixed feelings. She was nervous, her heart was beating faster, and her hands were shaking slightly from excitement before the upcoming meeting with her love. As she waited for the moment when he would get out of the carriage, her heart fluttered in anticipation, and she could hardly hear her father's words. After all, she will finally be able to see his face, feel his presence, and understand what kind of person he really is. But all thoughts and worries faded into the background, because instead of the Duke, his assistant came out and introduced himself. Seeing her face, he hiccuped in surprise and wondered what kind of new makeup this was. Was this really so popular in the capital now? When he finally stepped out of the carriage, his figure seemed to her strikingly confident and calm. He took a slow step forward, smiling softly, and her heart suddenly began to beat a little faster, and in that moment she felt confident. Euclid inquired about the Duke's health, and Jane could not take her eyes off him. This was the man who would change her future. And even if the world turned upside down and time went back, she knew for sure that she had come into this world to meet him. At that moment she wanted to cry, because the feeling of the fatefulness of this moment engulfed her to the depths of her soul. It was as if her entire long journey had led to this very moment, and she had been reunited with her first love after a long separation. He introduced himself, and she thought he was like a statue carved by God, and his voice was so good. She was thinking about how he was just a minor character, and was so lost in her thoughts that she even forgot that she also needed to introduce herself. If it weren't for her father, who brought her back to her senses with his meaningful cough, she would have just stood there, admiring her groom. Trying to sound more confident, she introduced herself, and their eyes met in quiet, tense anticipation. They looked at each other carefully, trying to catch every facial feature, every movement, every emotion hidden behind the eyes. His gaze softened, and in it she noticed the warmth she had long dreamed of, as if he already knew that this was the beginning of something special. At that moment he tenderly kissed her hand, as if expressing respect and awe before this meeting. She felt the warmth of his lips and a tremor in her heart, as if his every movement was filled with sincere tenderness and respect. Jane's feelings were trembling. She didn't know what to do. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and thoughts were spinning in her head like a whirlwind. Her favorite kissed her hand, and she wanted this moment to last forever, so that nothing would disturb this magical feeling. She wanted to take his hand and go into the room, but she cut off her fantasies because she couldn't think about such things in broad daylight. The owner of the house asked Euclid if he was probably tired from the journey, but the guest replied that the trip was comfortable thanks to the Manna carriage. When Duke Basil invited the groom into the house, as dinner would soon be served, he replied that he would like to change his clothes first. Jane decided to take advantage of this situation to get up and touch up her makeup, and realized the sidelong glances she was getting. Seeing my reflection, I thought that when I applied my makeup, everything wasn't so bad, but apparently while I was walking, it started to blur. She had on the end-of-the-world makeup she'd seen on TV as a child, and her outfits didn't match in color. She thought that Euclid truly had the heart of an angel, since he was so kind to her, even despite that horrible makeup, and she almost burst into tears of happiness at the sight of her favorite, although she was afraid that she would feel hostility, as in the case of Richard. Catching herself thinking this, she became curious as to whether her genuine love for this character had overcome the feelings of that Jane. She was distracted from her thoughts by the maid, who came to ask if she needed anything and brought something. Our heroine asked what kind of bottles these were, and Anne replied that they were all kinds of medicines, black sedative, the rest were for digestion. She added in an apologetic tone that she hadn't thought that the lady would be so nervous and that she would put on her makeup in such a terrible way. In response, Jane thanked her for taking care of her at least now, because now she knew for sure that she would be able to sit through dinner calmly. And then she added that she would have a request, and Anne replied that she was ready to help her mistress with anything. The tension between them eased, and Jane said that first they needed to completely wash off the makeup and asked for another dress to be brought. Going down to the dining room, our heroine was very surprised that no one was there yet, except for cousin Melissa. She walked quickly towards her, asking in surprise where everyone else was. Melissa just sighed and stared at Jane. This look made our heroine nervous. She had already encountered this today, so she asked what was on her face. But she exhaled when her cousin replied that she was very beautiful. Then Melissa shared her impressions of Duke Rudian. His sister said he seemed like a good man to her, and Jane thought it was the perfect time to show off her favorite. He and Melissa were alone now, and she could calmly talk about her impressions, although she had only exchanged greetings with him. Therefore, she said that he also seemed to her to be a pleasant young man, and not only in appearance but also in his aura, which was soft and noble. I have heard a lot about his wonderful character, and it seems that he really is a kind-hearted person, as they say. Then she added that she wanted to talk to him as soon as possible to get to know him better, because she was interested in everything. Having fallen silent, I thought about his sincere feelings and high intentions, feeling joy that I had found such a worthy person. At that moment the milords entered, and our heroine's heart skipped a beat with excitement behind her father. She saw her favorite. Duke Basil, as the host of the house and the father of the bride, invited everyone to the table, saying that he hoped that the food would be to everyone's taste. Once again, having introduced Euclid Rudian to everyone present, he asked the guest to sit down in the place of honor at the table. He said that if he needed anything or there were dishes that he didn't like, the guest should speak up without hesitation. Jane thought only about her groom, about how dazzlingly handsome he was, and how bright colors suited him so well they fit him like a glove. The only thing she regretted was that the plan with the paired outfits had failed, because Euclid had also changed for dinner. I thought how it was possible to be so beautiful, golden hair, skin as white as jade, a face as if carved by a sculptor. It was truly an unearthly beauty, as if it had come from another world to illuminate this ordinary day with its radiance. Her heart began to beat faster when their eyes met, and in that moment it seemed as if the whole world had disappeared, leaving only this moment. She felt something special ignite inside her, like a spark lit between them that could flare into a flame. Thinking along these lines, it suddenly seemed to her that his face had turned strangely red, and she looked closely. When he coughed a little, Jane thought that it was her fault. She couldn't stare at a guest like that. It was completely indecent. Duke Basil asked with concern if everything was all right, and upon learning that there was nothing serious, asked that if anything was wrong, be sure to let him know. Then, turning to his daughter, he said that she had barely touched her food. Although this was not surprising, she probably had a lot of questions for the groom. She thought that her father had hit the nail on the head again. She was so engrossed in admiring her future husband that she completely forgot about food. He continued in the meantime that if she wanted to ask Duke Rudian something, she could safely ask him directly. Having started to say what she wanted to ask, our heroine hesitated because she did not know where to begin, since she wanted to know everything. Her father, noticing her embarrassment, said that she was shy, but Jane was really worried, so much so that she thought she might die. Sionel continued the conversation, saying that he saw that the guest was accompanied only by an assistant, and asked if there was anyone else with him. After all, as he remembers, Euclid has a couple of nephews, and he replied that they are still too young and have never left the north. He added that thanks to the care of Duke Basil they arrived quickly, but his stay in the capital would be very short, and he did not take them. The owner of the house then said that he was in too much of a hurry, since he was planning to leave immediately after the ceremony, back to the north. However, Jane had already packed her things, so she asked, because her father didn't want her to change her plans at the last minute. My lord said that since Euclid was in the capital, why not stay and visit the palace and pay a visit to the emperor? Surprised, our heroine asked if the emperor was not the head of any of their families, and whether it was necessary to report to him personally. When the owner of the house presented another argument, the guest explained that his nephews were still young, so it would be difficult for him to stay late. Then I heard Cyanal's question. He was asking if Euclid didn't like something, since he didn't even bring his things into the designated room. He replied that he had not unpacked his things because he planned to spend the night at the Rudion family's mansion in the capital. He explained that he wouldn't feel uncomfortable there, even though he hadn't been there for a long time. There were servants from the imperial palace there, and they were watching everything. Our heroine was surprised why there were imperial servants in the Rudion mansion, but she didn't have time to ask because Melissa spoke up. She said that she and her sister would probably see each other less often now, and then her father suggested that Jane would come to the capital often. Adding that she would be lonely in a distant land, our heroine replied that the north was now her home, and she would have to get used to living there. However, when she saw the upset faces of those present, she added that she could and would come to the capital to visit them. Then she was even more surprised. Okay, the others were upset, that was understandable, but why did Euclid have such a surprised face? And she answered this question herself, because he thinks that she is obsessed with the crown prince, so her answer came as a surprise to him. Having calmed down, our heroine decided that she would simply gradually prove to her favorite that she was a completely different person. And as she continued to watch Euclid, she noted to herself that even when he had a surprised face, he was so cute. When dinner was over and everyone went outside, it was already dark, and the soft light of the moon filled the estate with a silvery glow. Seeing off the guest, the owner of the house advised him to be careful and expressed the hope that he would see him tomorrow at the temple in excellent shape. Duke Basil was so pleased with the evening and his future son-in-law that his daughter had to ask him to control himself. When Euclid cast his parting glance at her, her heart stopped, and she even felt like she wouldn't live to see tomorrow. At that moment, she couldn't even imagine what an indelible impression she made on her chosen one. He continued to reflect on her beauty and inner strength, realizing that in front of him was a person who could change his life forever. He found it difficult to concentrate on Delano's words, who asked how the dinner had gone and, without thinking, answered that it had gone well. I ignored his chatter about how the dinner couldn't possibly be bad and that he couldn't even imagine what it was like to live in such luxury. Euclid perked up a little only when the assistant asked how he liked the lady, whether the first impression had been shocking. Delano continued that apparently the Duke was also very surprised, to be honest. His heart almost stopped when he saw the lady. Then Euclid asked if the assistant was also experiencing the same, and he replied that his heart was still pounding wildly. Ignoring this remark, the Duke said that it was as if he had seen a painting come to life, and it was incredibly beautiful. Having seen such a beauty for the first time in his life, Delano thought that it turned out that the Duke liked women with a frightening aura, and he asked if the Duke thought the atmosphere was a little gloomy, as if everything was happening under duress. Euclid thought that the main thing was to conclude this marriage at any cost, and then he was going to let her live freely. That was his plan. But, strange as it may be for him to admit it, as soon as he saw her, it seemed to him that time had stopped. And a strange feeling arose, as if there were only the two of them left in this world, and he had finally found what he had been looking for a very long time. The one who can fill his heart with warmth and meaning, as if the whole world had shrunk to this one moment. At the same time, he sincerely believed that the lady had not the slightest desire to enter into this marriage, but how very wrong he was. A conversation with Duke Basil before dinner explained a lot. He asked Euclid if he was interested in why they were rushing the wedding. He replied that he was only grateful that Duke Basil had treated him so favorably and did not dare to think of anything else. The owner of the house said that even though Jane was his daughter, he often didn't understand what was on her mind, and Euclid had probably heard a lot about it. Then he asked the guest if he had heard that he had recently found his niece and given her his last name, and he confirmed that he had heard. And recently the imperial court sent a marriage proposal to their house, and at first Duke Basil thought it was for Jane. Interrupting, Euclid asked if it was really meant for his niece, and the owner confirmed it and said that it was a shock for him. And he continued that, of course, Jane was deeply hurt, but as the future showed, it even benefited her. Now she finally decided to face the truth. In other words, it was her daughter who proposed this marriage. Duke Rudian was surprised. He did not expect such a turn of events, but after thinking about it, he realized that then a lot becomes clear. A new understanding of the situation arose within him, and he looked at the proposal from a slightly different angle. Contrary to his expectations, it was not Duke Basil who initiated the union, it was Jane herself who wanted to conclude it. It was her own desire to put an end to her long-standing love affair, and perhaps after the wedding she would regret her choice. But if he breaks off this engagement now, he will lose the trust of the ducal house of Basile. What will happen to the debts and his nephews? He didn't have time to think about what would happen to his brother's children. They had already arrived at the estate, and the guard's voice brought him out of his thoughts. The security at the Rudian Duke's mansion was tight, and not many guests visited the house, so they were asked to introduce themselves. Delano was outraged by such insolence and told his master not to worry, he would come out now and sort everything out. Euclid replied that he would go out himself, and at the gate they said that this was the Rudian estate, under the control of the imperial palace. As soon as the Duke stepped into the illuminated space, the guard recognized him, but asked in surprise why he was there at such a late hour. Then he realized that he was behaving inappropriately with his lordship, and in a more respectful tone he inquired about affairs in the capital. However, the Duke had already had a hard day, so he simply said that he was tired, wanted to rest, and asked to open the gates. The mansion had been empty for nearly 500 years since it was donated by the first emperor, and the Rudian family even tried to get it back. But the imperial family refused and took on all the costs of its upkeep, so it is more correct to consider it royal property. The servants came out to greet the master, and the butler Philip added that they had not seen him in this mansion for a long time. In a tired voice, Euclid confirmed that it was indeed a long time since they had seen each other, and then asked to be escorted to his chambers. Philip clarified that if the gentleman had traveled directly from the duchy, then it would have taken a couple of days by manna carriage, and then asked if dinner should be served. To which the Duke replied that he was not hungry, and all he needed now was to wash and go straight to bed, and asked if they would prepare it. After taking a warm bath, he felt completely relaxed. All the tension and fatigue in his soul and body disappeared. A very young servant entered the chambers, whom Euclid saw for the first time, although the appearance of a new servant in this mansion was rare. He introduced himself as Rick, and when asked if the water was the right temperature, the Duke replied that he was pleased to meet him. He then thanked him for the comfortable bath and added that he didn't need anything else today, so Rick could go. Before leaving, he said that if the gentleman needed anything else, he could call him at any time. Left alone, he began to think, and the feeling of discomfort arose again in his thoughts. He had never liked this mansion, and from the moment he crossed the threshold, he vaguely felt something unusual and disturbing, as if there was an invisible energy in the air. All of this weighed on him, giving him no peace, reminding him that this place hid long-forgotten secrets and unfinished business. This mansion was no different from the golden cage created by the imperial family, which kept him captive in luxury. The room seemed filled with echoes of past years and hidden secrets, and the feeling of being trapped inside never left him for a moment. There had always been servants and magical artifacts there to keep an eye on him, and this time the situation was no different. It was still an eerie place, and he had the constant feeling of something invisible and dangerous being there. The Elios Empire had two founding families, Basil, which possessed colossal wealth, and Rudian, which produced great magicians. The Basil family supported the first emperor with its enormous capital, and the head of the Rudian family became a loyal magician and comrade. After the first emperor slew the evil dragon, both families were recognized as founders and were given titles and lands. However, for some reason, the Rudian family suddenly left the capital and settled in the cold north, and even in such conditions lived happily. With a caring father and a wise older brother, Euclid lived a quiet life, surrounded by the love of his family. Until 5 years ago, his father died, and this fateful moment divided his happy, measured life into before and after. His brother told him this sad news, but Euclid was even more upset by his words that, apparently, he too would not last long. He was ready to drop everything and rush to help his brother, but his brother made him promise that he would not take any action. He said that he left evidence, adding that he did not know whether it would help or, on the contrary, would become an unbearable burden for him. With words to take care of Marianne and Dior, the brother left him the title of head and nephews, returning back as a cold corpse. Unable to forget his brother's last words, Euclid, like a hunted animal, madly searched the mansion. Every room, every corner seemed familiar to him, and at the same time alien, filled with secrets. He checked every crack, and on the same day he discovered listening devices and magical surveillance artifacts for the first time. After this, he began to suspect all the servants, catching their every word, action, every gesture. He lived in constant anxiety. From such tension, his feelings became more acute than ever, and, in the end, his spirit could not bear it. It broke, and everything collapsed. Then he wondered if it would be easier for them if he died, since he couldn't even protect his own sick and weak body. Doubt and despair were seething inside, as if the shadow of hopelessness made him feel helpless and without any meaning. Then he asked himself, if he were to run away into the arms of death, what would happen to the children that his brother had entrusted to him before his death? And he answered himself that if he died, then these children would not survive. He realized that the fight against fate was the only thing that remained for him. That day, he decided that it would be better for him to demonstrate his weakness and impotence so that they would lose their vigilance. From then on, he cast aside his doubts and desperately fought for survival, hiding his true strength behind a mask of helplessness. Every movement was carefully calculated, every step was just an illusion of indifference to confuse the enemies. Therefore, for the sake of himself and the Rudion family, he is obliged to enter into this marriage, not only as a step to preserve the family, but also as a duty to his brother. After all, only the combination of their two destinies could become a guarantee of stability, despite internal doubts and personal feelings. It was the only thing that such a powerless man as he considered himself could do for the family in this situation. Even if his choice hurt her, he sincerely hoped that by putting duty above feelings, he could secure the future. Inside, he felt the weight of this decision. It was like a burden tearing at his heart, but at the same time, it gave him his last hope. He felt the weight of responsibility, but deep down, he hoped that in time, all this would become part of his destiny. Every breath he took was filled with doubt and quiet determination. He knew that the decision he made would determine more than just his fate. The long-awaited wedding day had finally arrived, and she hoped that the day would be as clear and beautiful as the ceremony itself. Despite the slight excitement at this special moment, she wanted to believe that everything would be fine and that there was a bright future ahead. However, seeing the gloomy and crumpled faces of her brother and father, our heroine became worried that something had happened, and she had not yet been informed. But everything turned out to be much more prosaic. They looked so unwell because they had overindulged at dinner the previous night. The father said, "Isn't it offensive to her, because a wedding happens once in a lifetime, and especially such a wedding, and many aristocrats would like to congratulate them." Jane sighed heavily and thought that then she would have to endure all these unfamiliar aristocrats, and she didn't need any show-off. She said out loud that now was not the time for lavish celebrations, and that she preferred a quiet family ceremony. To which the Duke replied that that was true. She never liked noisy gatherings, and he, to be honest, was very worried. She hadn't often opened her soul before, and he couldn't believe that she had changed in an instant. After the Crown Prince's refusal, she acted as if she was about to die, which aroused suspicion. But now he sees that she is the daughter he knew. Our heroine had no idea that the Duke was so worried about her it gave her a strange feeling, but she was still pleased. Breaking the silence, the Duke said that he had heard that the High Priest would personally bless this marriage and that it was a great honor for the family. At that moment, Melissa choked, and everyone worriedly asked how she was doing, and she muttered an excuse that the soup just went down the wrong way. However, Jane knew the real reason for this incident. Her cousin seemed excited about seeing Damien today. Damien, the High Priest of the Elios Empire, was the last main character of the novel in which our heroine found herself. He had a noble appearance and a compassionate character, but he responded to Melissa's confession very coldly and decisively. His cousin was devastated by his refusal, but Jane believed that he had done the right thing, as he possessed outstanding holy power. and they called him God's favorite, and then suddenly she was horrified. What if, possessing such holy power, he realized that she was from another world? Euclid slept poorly that night. He was tormented by doubts, and in order to calm his soul, he decided to talk to his bride. About an hour before the wedding ceremony, he approached the door of her chambers and stopped, uncertain whether he was doing the right thing. Once again, he went over his arguments in his head and thought that even if this marriage was concluded out of selfish desire, he must see it through to the end. Inside, he felt that this step was the only path that could lead him to even the slightest peace. He knew the price of this decision was high, but he understood that refusing could mean losing everything and leaving the family's future to the mercy of fate. He carefully considered every word he was going to say to his bride, choosing them with great care. He understood that these words could determine their future, and he wanted them to sound sincere and calm. Saying that he had something to talk to her, he began to open the door, but when he saw what she was doing, he himself, without wanting to, became scared. Could it be that she had poison in her hands? The thought suddenly ran through his mind, engulfing him like a cold stream of fear. He looked at her with slight disbelief, trying to understand whether she was really so desperate because she would not marry the crown prince. At that moment, all his confidence wavered. He decided that he had to stop her from drinking it, no matter what. He had no time to think about the consequences of his actions, and he rushed forward, ready to do anything to save her. He asked, she hadn't drunk it yet, then, barely containing his excitement, what she was even thinking about when she decided to do such a thing. He said that this was not a way out of the situation. Even if she didn't like this marriage, she still couldn't do this. Duke Rudian hoped that she would not take this marriage so seriously because it was only a temporary step, a necessity, a need imposed by circumstances, not a true desire, and it is important to maintain dignity, to seek a solution without giving in to despair. He believed that she could break off the engagement at any moment, and he never entertained the hope that he could replace the crown prince. However, seeing her in this state made him feel strange, and he wanted to relieve her of this burdensome obligation. So Euclid said that he would come out right now and announce that it was all a mistake and there would be no wedding. But she replied that it seemed he had misunderstood everything. She was going to take a sedative to relieve the tension. When he asked again that it was just medicine, our heroine replied that she was so nervous that she asked the maid to bring it. Yesterday before lunch, Anne brought her a few bottles, and this sedative really helped her relax a lot. At that moment, he realized how wrong he was and how he now looked in her eyes, so he apologized, and she replied that it was okay. She thought to herself that he was so sweet. He rushed to save her, but she didn't even know why he suddenly burst in on her. So she decided to clarify this and asked why he came here when there was very little time left before the wedding ceremony. She felt a little awkward because she thought her question had sounded too harsh, and she smiled to soften the situation. However, his answer that he came to apologize amazed her to the depths of her soul, not understanding what he could have done wrong to her. He explained that, considering the benefits his family would receive from the union, he was sorry that her husband would be such an unworthy man. He continued, so even if she hates him after the wedding, it's okay and he won't be offended. Even if there is another person in her heart, then everything is fine, and it seemed to her that he misunderstood something about this marriage. Anne announced from the doorway that the ceremony would soon begin, so the lady needed to hurry up and get ready to go out. The Duke realized that he had created an awkward situation for his bride, so he apologized again and said that he would go first. Our heroine was beside herself because, due to the arrival of the maid, she missed the moment to object and express her opinion. Jane wondered what the hell was going on even before the wedding began. It turns out her favorite guy was misunderstanding everything. At the same time, he also says that everything is okay if she hates him, and moreover, he will not be offended if she loves another man. And she was offended at him because he didn't even tell his bride in a dress that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. But as soon as she saw his embarrassed face, all her resentment towards him immediately evaporated, as if it had never existed. Her heart melted, and she didn't want to think about the misunderstanding that had happened a few minutes ago. Now she just wanted to enjoy these moments, the warmth in her soul, the quiet light in his eyes and his smile. At that moment, everything seemed simple and sincere, and she decided to leave the past behind, allowing herself to simply be here and now. and completely immerse yourself in this rare and precious moment of happiness, leaving all doubts and worries outside of this day. She wanted to remember how their hearts united in a warm and sincere impulse, creating memories that would remain in the soul. Our heroine sincerely believed that true happiness lies in such simple moments, and it was now that she felt it best. And although there were many difficulties, she was finally marrying the man she could only dream of before. On this day, everything seemed possible, and this moment became the beginning of a new life, filled with hope for the future, no matter what. She felt that in this union there would be strength to overcome any obstacles. Her heart told her that this was her true happiness. Demian, as promised, conducted this ceremony personally, and the first thing he asked was that the groom was Euclid Rudion and the bride was Jane Basil. The young couple replied that everything was correct, and although our heroine was attending a wedding for the first time, she still found it strange that he was clarifying this. It seemed to her that the high priest should know the names of the people he was going to marry, especially since he himself had given them permission. However, the church minister said he had not heard the answer and asked again whether it was true that the bride was Jane Basil. She answered in the affirmative, and Euclid thought, why ask twice? It makes him nervous. Demian said that he would then begin the wedding ceremony and solemnly ask in the name of the goddess Hesiron. Cast aside false beliefs and repent, the goddess will not ignore those who defile this land with false speeches. Until the evil that sows chaos in the world triumphs, repent, pray, and wish for peace, and then salvation will surely await you in the end. Our heroine wondered if wedding sermons in church were always like this, and that, judging by the whispers, the guests were also perplexed. It was a good thing she hadn't yet seen her father, who was fuming and not understanding what the hell was wrong with this high priest. Delano's assistant also did not understand how he dared to make such impudent speeches at the wedding of their ducal family. The high priest, asking everyone to humble their hearts and submit to their predetermined fate, asked if they understood what he meant. Such speeches puzzled our heroine. She did not like this strange sermon at first, and then the call to submit to fate. She thought that Jane was destined to be obsessed with the crown prince, divorced and killed, but she was not going to accept such a fate. So she asked the high priest what if it was her destiny to forge her own path, contrary to what was predetermined. And when Demian replied that there might not be a second chance, she said that this is usually how it happens. The priest heard that the bride's relatives did not understand what they had just said, but he ignored their remark. He could not explain to them why the ceremony had begun this way, so he solemnly said, "May the blessing be with you." Then he continued that now the bride and groom could say their wedding vows and looked meaningfully at those present. At that moment, our heroine thought that she would say what she had been rehearsing for the last few days. Euclid Rudion made his vow that he would take Jane Basil as his wife and solemnly swear to respect her for the rest of his days. Mentally repeating the memorized words of the oath, she began by saying that she, Jane Basil, was taking Euclid Rudion as her husband. And then she continued that she swears to protect him more than her own life, and to defend him even at the cost of her own life. An incredible silence fell over the temple, and she looked at the surprised Euclid. Something was clearly wrong. Then she thought that she must have said something wrong again, and tried to remember the words she had just spoken. Then she realized that she was supposed to say, to be faithful and honest until the end of her days. After clearing his throat, the high priest continued that they could now exchange rings and seal their vows with a kiss. While they were still at the estate, she overheard a conversation and realized that Duke Basil was disappointed that the rings were not diamonds. But she, on the contrary, liked these amethyst rings. They said that the founders of the Rudion family wore them. Her heart fluttered as he placed the ring on her ring finger. She thought how happy and lucky she was. She wanted to capture every moment, every smile, every look, every quiet warmth around them. In those moments, she felt that her whole life was made for this, and sincere gratitude grew inside her for the fact that fate had brought them together. She sighed softly, feeling a tenderness and confidence growing in her chest, as if the whole world had disappeared, leaving only the two of them. And she eagerly awaited the moment when their lips would touch in a sweet kiss, sealing within them the promise of eternal love. This long-awaited kiss was supposed to become for her a symbol of hope, harmony, and everything that she had long dreamed of finding. But for some reason he asked her not to worry because he would only pretend, and she did not understand what he meant. A second later, she felt completely disappointed. This was not what she expected, and a cold feeling of bewilderment spread through her heart. Something important was slipping away, and at that moment it seemed to her that what she had imagined for so long and this moment somehow did not coincide. I couldn't believe that this was happening in reality, that the most anticipated kiss ended, essentially, before it even began. But the sadness could not linger. The next important step lay ahead, signing the marriage contract. Although our heroine couldn't help but think that she really wanted to kiss for real, it didn't happen. However, when she signed the contract, her mood improved. There was still much ahead with her beloved Euclid. Demian said that in the name of the goddess Hezairon, he declared this marriage concluded and our Jane was in seventh heaven. Her father said that if anything happened, she could let him know at any time, because even after getting married, she would still be Basil. She replied that she was now a member of the Rudion family and could take care of herself, and asked him not to worry about her so much. In response, she heard that she was the rightful mistress of the ducal house of Rudion, but still, the fact that she was his daughter remained unchanged. Jane said she knew, and there was a note of determination and confidence in her voice, as if she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Then they agreed with Melissa to write letters to each other, and she thought that she would learn news about her cousin from this correspondence. However, she had already met all three main characters, and none of them seemed normal, so her sister's future seemed bleak. The farewell dragged on, and she was already so impatient to set off, and Cyanol's presence was a little burdensome. Her father asked, upset, that they were already leaving, to which she replied that they couldn't stand on the road forever. My Lord Basil repeated that if she needed his help, they should not hesitate to contact him immediately. Jane thought that her dislike for Cyanol had not gone away, and it even seemed to her that she had become even more uncomfortable around him. At that moment, her brother asked her to stop for a minute, and she looked into his eyes a little irritatedly. The thought flashed through her mind that perhaps he had wanted to tell her something from the very beginning, and she had ignored him. Trying to hide her irritation, she asked what was the matter, and he replied that the carriage she would be riding in had not yet arrived. He then explained that the Magic Tower had just released a new model, and they had only informed their ducal house about it. When he continued that since several of her carriages were going to the Rudion Duchy, he decided that it was worth acquiring this one as well. She became thoughtful. At that moment she felt awkward. She was treating him so coldly, but her brother had not forgotten about her and had prepared a wedding gift. She became curious, and without hiding her impatience she asked, "So, where is the carriage in which she will travel north?" To which Cyanol replied in a conciliatory tone that the Magic Tower had promised to deliver it on time. And as soon as he said these words, the creaking of wheels was heard behind her, and our heroine had no doubt that this was her gift. She looked at it with some disbelief. She was very confused by the object that was behind the ordinary manna carriage. Moreover, someone was coming out of it. She looked closely, but could not figure out who else had come upon her head. The slightly disheveled young man said that he had hurried as much as he could to arrive exactly at the agreed time. He added that it seemed he was a little late, and then it dawned on our heroine that the head of the Magic Tower was in front of her. She had something to think about, because her brother's gift was delivered personally by the head of the Magic Tower. Why would that be? However, this fact surprised not only Jane, her older brother was no less amazed than she was, and perhaps even more. The chief explained that the Basil family was a VIP client who always ensured high sales, and he wanted to see their reaction. Cyanol clarified that he had come only for this purpose, to which he received the answer that the head also wanted to congratulate his friend on his wedding. Having learned this detail, Duke Basil asked why the head had not come to the ceremony and whether he had prepared a wedding gift, to which the magician retorted that he wasn't even invited. What kind of presents were they talking about, and why would he suddenly spend money on a gift? Euclid said that he hadn't even hoped for it. Then his friend replied that he had come such a long way, and they were telling him such things out of the blue. While the magician was offering to inspect the new carriage, Jane thought that he was arguing with Euclid in the way that only old friends do. The chief said that he created this masterpiece especially for the daughter of Duke Basil, and it is so perfect that it will only cause admiration. He continued enthusiastically, presenting to them his magnificent, perfect new carriage. Our heroine thought it was just a rocket. She couldn't call it a vehicle, but rather an interplanetary ship. The magician asked to look at the curves, saying that it seemed like it was about to take off and that the carriage looked incredibly fast. He made it exactly as in his dream, and looking at it again, he was convinced once again that it was a true technical masterpiece. It occurred to her that he was also a time traveler, otherwise how could he have created a carriage in the shape of a rocket, or maybe it was just a coincidence. She said out loud that the chief was so proud of the new carriage, and she thought there was something incredible there, and that it was the first time she had seen such a design. Insulted, the magician said that she couldn't even imagine how much money had been spent on its creation, and how the Duke's daughter could say such a thing. Then she said that she would be uncomfortable riding in it, and the head replied that he had tried so hard and decorated the carriage especially for the bride. And the interior decoration is made of the best materials. After these words, Jane suggested moving the things to another carriage. Half an hour later, everything was ready, and Euclid said that they would go, and Jane noted that he said so sweetly that the father asked them to drive carefully and send word as soon as they reached the place so that they would not worry about them. Ultimately, our heroine insisted on her own and set off for the far north and her new home in an old carriage. The father and son watched them for some time with looks that concealed hope and anxiety for the future. Then Sionel said that taking the old carriage instead of this new and perfect one was a real stroke of luck, and the difference in price was quite noticeable. The head of the family could not understand how the Duke's daughter could consider the carriage shameful. It was beyond his comprehension. The tower's magician asked the chieftain if he knew how scared he was when the carriage disappeared, and added that he should have at least warned them. Then he asked where the old carriage was, hadn't the wedding ended, to which the chief replied that he had given away the old carriage and received a new one. At that moment, it turned out that the carriage that took the newlyweds to the Duchy of Rudion contained all the proceeds from the previous month. Well, no matter how indignant the head of the magic tower was, there was nothing that could be done. The Duke's daughter was taking away his earnings. Our heroine felt the seat and thought there was something there, but she decided not to focus on it. The maid, noticing her actions, asked if the lady was uncomfortable, to which she replied that everything was fine. She was actually worried about something completely different. Even though Sionel had given her a carriage, she couldn't ride in the same one with Euclid. The first part of the plan was successfully carried out. She left the capital, and she was especially pleased that she did so before the Crown Prince's return. The last meeting was so unpleasant that she did not want to deal with him again, and besides, she was now a married woman. The thought that she was now a married lady warmed her heart, and she did the impossible and married her favorite. Sadly remembering that there was no kiss at the wedding, even though they were so close, I decided that I would get closer to him gradually. From now on, she will be next to Euclid, so she will be able to slowly prove her sincerity to him in practice. But then she didn't know yet, and really thought that she would have a chance to dispel his misunderstanding and confess her feelings. How presumptuous it was of her to think that the happy days would last forever. The capital had other plans for that. Emperor Owen Elios said he thought someone had sent him a fake when he received his marriage certificate yesterday. To which Duke Basil replied, "What kind of foolish fool would dare to invent such a lie about his daughter?" The emperor replied that it was nevertheless unexpected, since until now there had been no talk of the engagement of the Duke's daughter. The Duke said that there were, of course, proposals, and there were many of them, but they were only waiting for one from the Crown Prince. However, since the heir proposed to Melissa, they were ultimately forced to find a worthy match for Jane. Mentally calling his son a brat, the emperor remembered Kaiden's promise to sort everything out himself, but in the end he brought him to this. The next day, the small procession continued north, and Delano's assistant shared with his master, telling him that Madame definitely had something special, and that it seemed to him that she had simply incredible luck. The Duke looked at his companion with an incomprehensible look and thought what an interesting thing he had come up with this time. Delano told him that yesterday, when they stopped for the night, Lady Jane had helped a man. The assistant could not hide his amazement, saying that in gratitude the man gave her a luxury watch. He continued that today, while choosing gifts for her nephews, she won so many lotteries and received 2 teddy bears. And each such toy costs 15 gold pieces, and therefore he thinks that the Basil family is apparently haunted by special monetary luck. After telling this story, Delano added that he was more surprised by what he heard yesterday when she said her marriage vows. She swore to protect her master more than her own life and to defend him at the cost of her own, and it was the first time he had seen a bride make such a vow. He was afraid that Lady Jane would continue to pursue the crown prince after the wedding, but it seems she is taking the marriage seriously. Euclid, having said that it could be this way or that, decided for himself not to jump to conclusions, but to see what would happen next. Jane thought they were passing over a mountain range, and the carriage was shaking violently, and that miserly head of the tower had only cast acceleration magic. She wasn't worried about herself or Anne. She didn't want the gifts for her nephews, which she had chosen with such warmth, to be damaged. Literally a couple of minutes later, she heard the joyful cry of the maid, who informed her that they had arrived at the castle. Looking out the window, our heroine could not help but agree. Before her eyes there really did rise the Rudion family castle. As she left, she thought that this was now her and Euclid's cozy nest, and here she would build her family happiness. However, the north greeted her harshly. The faces of the vassals seemed gloomy and sour, as if clouds were hanging over their heads. Their gazes were full of distrust and disappointment, and the cold wind teased them, adding to the feeling of tension in the air. This hospitality was more of a test, and she felt she would have to show perseverance to win their respect. She even understood them a little because they were probably offended that he got involved with such a villain, and then she saw the children. Although they stood at some distance, the family resemblance was obvious. They were definitely Euclid's nephews. Meanwhile, those gathered greeted their master with reverence and respect, expressing their devotion. To which the Duke expressed his surprise that everyone had gathered, and they replied that they were asking for forgiveness for not warning them in advance. Then Euclid thanked everyone for taking the time out of their busy schedules to come and congratulate him on his wedding. He asked his wife if she was surprised and explained that he had wanted to arrange an official meeting and introduce her, but his vassals had decided otherwise. As they rode to the duchy, she had already heard him call her mistress and wife, but her heart continued to flutter at these words. Then turning to his nephews, he asked them to come over so they could meet their new aunt. At that moment, our heroine thought that she was not mistaken and that these were indeed her nephews, and she decided to approach them herself. The thought occurred to her that this needed to be done with the utmost delicacy so as not to frighten the children. Euclid said the children seemed shy around strangers, but they had no opportunity to meet new people. Jane told him that there was nothing strange about it. All children are often shy. Then she looked at them and introduced herself in a gentle tone. She told them that they could just call her auntie, and added that she was really counting on them in the future. At that moment, the girl started screaming, but Jane knew the reason, so she decided not to focus on it. However, then Dior started yelling. He almost hysterically declared that she was not an aunt at all, but a real witch. Our heroine was so taken aback by this statement that at first she couldn't even think of what to say to her nephew. Euclid stood up for her. Turning to the little boy, he asked how he spoke to his aunt and asked him to apologize. Then he asked her for forgiveness, adding that he was truly very sorry, but the children were still so young and still didn't understand a lot. But she didn't hold a grudge against them, and also said kindly that in the fairy tales she read, witches were always beautiful. And she asked if he also considered her beautiful, and Dior replied that yes, she was beautiful, and he himself was scared that he admitted it out loud. Jane wanted to establish contact with them, and since the first step was more or less successful, she decided to thank them. She said that she was pleased to hear kind words addressed to her, so she wants to treat him to something tasty. Saying she had bought it on the way, Jane offered them one each to try and thought that after all, children are children and they are cute. Our heroine managed to win their trust, but this surprised Euclid, who considered his nephews less sociable. And apparently there was a reason for this obvious displeasure with this turn of events was reflected on the face of another witness to this scene. Jane did not see this, but, still left alone, she thought about it, and the more she thought about that situation, the stranger it seemed to her. The only thing she could say for sure was that Marianne had definitely screamed, either from fear or pain. She still didn't know the real reason for this behavior, but she did have some guesses. She was distracted from her thoughts by the maid, who came to tell her that dinner was almost ready, so it was time for them to go to the dining room. As Jane got out of the bathroom, she thought it would be better to go and see the children and find out everything in person, rather than rack her brains getting lost in guesses. As she descends into the dining room, our heroine is filled with determination and calm, as the real answers could be closer than they seemed. When she entered, the first thing that caught her eye was the seating arrangement at the table, and she found it extremely uncomfortable. The maid explained that she had been placed there because she thought it might be awkward for her to sit next to Marianne and Dior. Thinking that from such a distance she wouldn't even be able to see Euclid's face, she said she would like her seat to be moved closer. Explaining that they were now a family, so eating together could help everyone bond faster, she surprised the servants. The Duke offered her his place, and Jane at first thought that he was accurately capturing her feelings, so she thought, but she was wrong. As soon as she sat at the head of the table, she immediately felt out of place. She didn't like this seating arrangement either. She also didn't like one woman who was also in the dining room, but no one even thought to introduce her to our heroine. Jane didn't want to think about it yet, especially since the lady had been glaring at her ever since she arrived. At first, she thought it might be the nanny, but the children looked at her too often, clearly seeking support. Any uncertainty is annoying, so Jane felt that she needed to sort this out too, so she asked her name. Having inquired in passing that the lady was apparently the nanny of the young lady and young gentleman, Euclid answered for her, introducing her as Lady Bursa. Then he added that it was not a nanny, but his sister-in-law's younger sister, and Lady Burse usually helped look after her nephews. It turned out that the sister-in-law's sister lived in the Duke's castle and looked after her nephews, and this region could not be called rich, so why come here? Jane found all this suspicious and asked how often the lady visited the Duke's castle. Looking after children is not an easy task. And she asked her husband if she lived in the castle, to which the Duke replied that he was not so reckless as to allow an unmarried lady to live in the castle. She wondered if the question was really that inappropriate. In any case, she was standing behind her nephews, so she should be more careful. Having chosen a line of conduct, our heroine asked if Lady Burse was going to come tomorrow and added that it would be better if after lunch. She explained that she would be busy in the morning and therefore planned to explore the castle, and then told Lady Burse that she was free for today. This was said in such a commanding tone that she had no choice but to submit to the will of the new mistress of the castle. However, our heroine was aware that this was only the beginning, and Lady Burse would not give up her position in the house so easily. But she also saw a positive side to this, because now she knew her enemy by sight and therefore would be able to deal with it. As soon as the husband's sister-in-law left the dining room, Dion said that Amy said that the aunt was a bad person, and he should protect the uncle from the aunt. To get away from this delicate topic, Euclid asked his nephew if he had been scared while his uncle was away. When the little boy replied that he had not been home for long, the Duke apologized for not being able to return sooner. In response, Dior asked to fulfill one of his wishes, and although Euclid was surprised, he still asked what his nephew wanted. The young gentleman hesitated a little, then looked at his angry sister, but still blurted out that he was with me tonight. Marianne picked up and repeated it tonight, continuing that she had heard that the two of them would share a bed. This was said with such childish spontaneity that the adults were a little taken aback at first, especially their uncle. At that moment, a look of complete confusion appeared in his eyes. The naivety of this little child discouraged him. But he quickly found his way, and turning it into a joke, said that Marianne hadn't meant anything like that and asked not to misunderstand. Jane replied that the young lady had not been mistaken and thought to herself that she was awaiting this moment with incredible excitement. Some time ago, the young gentlemen, having met their new aunt, entered the nursery and stood in silence for several minutes. They had never seen such a quantity of gifts in their lives, even though they had not yet seen such a long one. Each box filled them with admiration and awe, as if the world around them had suddenly become filled with magic. After getting over the mild shock, Marianne thought for a moment, then said that she had told him not to do this and not to listen to Amy. To which the brother, a little confused by the tone, replied that Amy said that the woman who would become their aunt was very scary. And if he doesn't listen, she will punish her sister instead of him. Marianne replied that she had already said that she would sort it out herself. After thinking for a bit, Dior asked how her new aunt was, and his sister asked if she seemed like a good person to her brother. Hearing this question, the young gentleman was incredibly happy because he really wanted his opinion to coincide with his sister's opinion. Mariana, seeing her brother's violent reaction, said that she would repeat to him once again that her uncle would never marry a bad man. However, they did not know that Amy had already heard everything and was very angry. She was furious that the new Duchess was pretending to be kind and noble. Lady Bursay has not yet been able to figure out why the woman was behaving completely differently from what had been rumored. She pounced on her nephews and asked what about them, and that this was all they were capable of, feigning their hostility. Catching herself thinking that she needed to be more cunning with them, she asked in a gentle tone if they were really going to fall in love with that aunt. However, Marianne's naive answer that she didn't seem like such a bad person to her infuriated Lady Burse. She said harshly that everyone knew about that woman's bad character, and they, like little children, were taken in by sweets. Having shamed her nephews with just one tone, she continued that the Duke, their uncle, was practically sold into that house, and didn't they feel sorry for him? Seeing that her words had achieved the desired result, she softened and asked if they by any chance wanted to protect their uncle. Her calculation was simple: if she succeeded in turning the children against the Duchess from the very beginning, then she would achieve even more in the future. However, she did not know that this Jane was a completely different person, and therefore her plan was doomed to failure from the very beginning. Marianne said she heard that Grace's room would be opened after a long break and asked if they would be sleeping there together. Having received an affirmative answer, she said that she wished them good night and asked them not to worry about her and Dior. Then Jane asked what Grace's room was, and Euclid replied that it was the bedroom for the ducal couple. He explained that in the North, spouses are required to use Grace's room when they sleep together, which puzzled our heroine. He started saying that today was the first time, and she continued for him, saying that they should definitely spend their wedding night there. She thought about it. It turned out that in the Rudion family they set days in advance for sleeping together, and she found this strange. She silently hoped that her directness would not hurt his feelings too much, and hoped that he would not think anything like that about her. In any case, knowing Euclid's character, nothing will happen, and all these thoughts only prevent her from concentrating on food. Sitting in her chambers, our heroine tried to digest not only dinner, but also all the news that had fallen on her since her arrival. Much seemed incomprehensible to her, like disparate pieces of a mosaic that she could not fit together to form a complete picture. She listened with difficulty to the maid who wanted to change her clothes, and wearily replied that it was not necessary, she was going to bed anyway. What could she say to the maid if she thought about what a man who didn't even kiss at the wedding could do on the wedding night? After barking at Anne to give her a regular shirt, she calmed down and thought that this was even better, and she would be able to talk to him alone. And she decided that later, when they were alone, they would talk calmly. But now it was time for her to go to Grace's room. She couldn't understand why she was so nervous, because when she went out she was calm, but now she even broke out in a cold sweat. Perhaps before she kept herself in hand and knew what to expect, was confident in her abilities, but now it feels like the ground is slipping out from under her feet. Grace's room was already ahead, and she firmly told herself that she had to be calm, because nothing would happen anyway. Releasing the tension from my body, I felt calm rising inside me again, albeit with a hint of anxiety that had not yet completely gone away. Jane decided that the main thing was to keep a clear mind and not give in to fears, because it was calmness that would make her stronger. But when she saw the Duke, she was again overcome with confusion, only now of a slightly different nature. She did not understand what he was doing. And when she asked him this question, she noticed that he seemed to be hiding something, so she came closer. He found rose petals in his hands and, embarrassed, he said that it was a misunderstanding and he had not intended to scatter them. Then he went on to say that he thought it would be awkward if she saw how hard the maids had gone to decorate the room. Our heroine thought that this was probably the case, although in fact she had hoped a little differently. However, she liked the pleasant atmosphere in the room, and she even felt a little sorry to use it only on days when they slept together. Jane even wanted to express this thought, but he spoke first, saying that she had nothing to worry about. And even though tradition dictated that they would have to spend the night in Grace's room, he wouldn't do anything that would make her uncomfortable. She understood what he meant and thought that there was no need to rush into intimacy, but to build a trusting relationship first. Everything was as difficult as she expected. She even found it difficult to start the conversation she had planned. Gathering my courage, I asked him if he was very tired today, to which he replied that he was not too tired. Having said that was good, Jane went on to say that she had something she wanted to discuss with him, so it would be much more convenient if they sat down. And although outwardly she was full of calm, inside she was seething with excitement and doubt, like a storm beneath the quiet surface. This could not help but affect her movements, as if she were fighting within herself to maintain the appearance of self-confidence. She tripped and began to fall, and when Euclid tried to catch her, our heroine pulled him down with the force of inertia. Her heart began to beat faster, his lips were so close. For a second it even seemed to her that Providence itself was helping her. But seeing a shadow of fear and confusion in his eyes, she realized that the time had not yet come, and decided that it was still not worth rushing things. As she stood up, Euclid asked for forgiveness, replying that it was her fault, and she thought her heart was about to jump out of her chest. There was tension between them. She didn't know what to do with this atmosphere. It was too awkward, and she decided to get down to business. Having said that she wanted to ask him about something, she asked if he had a woman he loved, and he asked again. Then Jane explained that she was simply interested, that she had no intention of blaming him for anything, or, God forbid, interrogating him. She asked him to tell her honestly. Maybe because of his marriage to her he had to break up with someone, or there is someone he keeps in his heart. After all, she intends to remain faithful in this marriage, and, seeing his reaction, she thought that it seemed like he really did have someone. Unable to restrain herself, she asked if it was Lady Burse, and he replied that it was definitely not, and that he didn't even know why she suddenly asked about it. He then continued that he had never loved anyone romantically, and quietly added that he had no plans to in the future. Then our heroine clarified that, having married her, he would not fall in love with anyone else, and received an affirmative answer. Looking into her eyes, the Duke continued that if there was anyone in his heart, it would definitely be her, his wife. Mentally repeating his words, she tried to grasp their meaning, because it was vitally important to her. For her it was a confession, albeit an awkward and evasive one, but she decided to consider it his confession. It all drove her crazy. She couldn't hold back any longer, especially since it was her full wedding night. She was overwhelmed with emotion, a mixture of excitement and overwhelming desire, as if the boundaries were blurring and she longed to feel his warmth. Slightly stumbling, Euclid asked what she was doing, to which our heroine replied that she understood everything. Having asked him to shut up and close his eyes, she was ready to seduce him right then and there, despite his uncertainty. The morning sun peeked through the window, gently illuminating the room and shedding warm light, awakening new hopes. It was a truly incredible wedding night for her, and yesterday nothing really happened between her and Euclid. This night became for her not so much a time of passion, but a step towards a new beginning, full of inner searching. Last night, heated up by the Duke's unexpected confession, our heroine decided to seduce him. However, he asked her to go to bed quickly because she looked tired, and she didn't need to worry he wouldn't touch her for anything. In the end, nothing happened, but no matter what anyone says, it was the best wedding night for her. Admiring him, she thought how he could be so perfect, even when he was sleeping, and the bridge of his nose and his long eyelashes were so beautiful. Wondering if it was possible to be so happy, Jane noticed that he was slowly waking up, and she decided to pretend to be asleep to hide her excitement and the thoughts that were swarming in her head. Let him think that nothing bothers her, that she is calm and confident, as she thought, this will give her a little more time. She wanted to see what might happen next, but her heart was beating so hard that it could be heard through the wall. Having finally shaken off his dreams, the Duke saw that his wife was sleeping, her warm cheek pressed against his. At that moment, she looked like a little child, and he even felt a little sorry that he would have to wake her up. But on the other hand, he absolutely did not want to leave her here alone, so that she would be confused when she woke up alone. And anyway, it was her first night in the new house, so he carefully continued to wake her. Pretending to have just woken up, she heard an apology for waking her up, although she had slept so soundly before. He offered her to sleep a little longer if she was tired, but Jane refused, citing an agreement to inspect the castle. When she asked if he could give the tour himself, she unfortunately learned that he couldn't because a lot of work had piled up. Having apologized for this, he said that he would go first and send servants to her and asked her to wait a little for their arrival. Slightly disappointed, she thought that this was their first morning together, and couldn't he have stayed longer? However, seeing that he even blushed, taking it for embarrassment, she decided that the matter was truly urgent. The butler led her into the library and told her that it was so huge that it occupied most of the duchy's archives. She noted to herself that given the scale of the story, there should definitely be information on the history of the Rudion family and the previous chapters. Having clarified that she could come here at any time, the new Duchess decided to dig up everything, right down to Euclid's ancestors. The butler invited her to go into the hall where portraits of all the heads of the Rudion family, from the past to the present, were collected. It was a very tempting offer, because there she would be able to see a portrait of Euclid as a child, but she refused. Having said that she would go there tomorrow, she thought that since it came to that, she wanted to see them together with the Duke. Then she asked where her personal office was, where she could take care of her accounting books and other matters. He replied that until now he and the gentleman had managed the household affairs themselves, but now it would be right if Madame took everything upon herself. However, his enthusiasm did not resonate with her. She wondered if he was really going to dump everything on her and not do the work himself. In the end, she found out that the office was on the same floor as the gentleman, but from her point of view, they were located far from each other. She was also interested in why the lamps on the walls weren't lit, since they weren't just for decoration. The explanation was that the lamps were not used because mana stones were too expensive, and the current budget did not allow for their inclusion. Then the Duchess asked why this was so, since her family had sent enough mana stones, along with the mana carriages. In response, I heard that they were being kept, but even if they wanted to, it would be difficult due to the castle's large overall debts. So, completely unexpectedly for herself, our heroine learned about the debts, so she asked when they were planned to be repaid. And then I remembered that the original clearly stated that the duchy's debts were paid off soon after the wedding. She asked out loud to immediately bring her a list of the property received this time and the accounting records to check the remaining debt. At the moment when our heroine decided to check everything personally, her husband was busy with his business in his office. Today he was so absent-minded that Delano had to repeat the same thing to him several times. Tired of this state of affairs, the assistant said that the gentleman looked very tired, and perhaps because he had not slept well. The Duke put him down, saying that Delano himself was not yet married, so he could fully understand such curiosity. But this was still too personal, so the assistant replied that he was simply worried that the lady had caused any inconvenience. The Duke was even a little amused by such concern, and he hastened to reassure Delano, saying that his wife did not bother him at all. Then, remembering her beautiful sleeping face, he added that perhaps she was a little embarrassed after all. This innocence and vulnerability seemed to envelop him in warmth, and he felt an unusual, almost tremulous feeling. A warm sadness arose inside him, and he thought that no matter what, she would forever remain special in his heart. At that moment he had such a mysterious expression on his face that the assistant became seriously worried and then indignant. He had served this family faithfully for many years and could not allow his master to suffer because of some woman. By saying that he knew it, Delano left an ambiguous impression on the Duke, who could not understand what had happened. Then the assistant said that the Duke did not deserve such treatment, so he intended to lodge an official protest. In the heat of indignation, and as he assumed quite righteous, he moved towards the exit so as not to delay such an important decision. He said that it was simply unthinkable, and that it was all for the good of the Duke. Delano was not looking where he was going at all, and this led to the incident. The butler, who was walking towards them, opened the door and announced that this was a most noble man and that a true benefactor had come to the family. After casually asking what was wrong with the nose, the butler continued by saying that Madame had demanded that all the accounting books be provided to her. He said that he could not even imagine what she was really like, and he was endlessly ashamed of his prejudices and ingratitude. The Duke saw the old servant in such a state for the first time. He asked him to calm down and explain everything in order. Then he asked to clarify who exactly had asked for their accounting department, to which the butler replied that it was the new hope of the family, Mrs. Jane. He became quite emotional and explained that Madame had said that she would pay off all the debts with her dowry. At this point, Delano intervened in the conversation and asked for clarification, because the dowry was the personal property of the Duchess. The answer was that the butler, burning with shame, told her that the family's debts were simply enormous and much greater than one could imagine. After listening to this passionate speech, the Duke quietly noted that he probably shouldn't have emphasized it so much, but no one was listening to him. but Delano was very eager to know what the lady had answered, and the butler said thoughtfully that she had only grinned and asked, "Does he know who she is?" and then added that, no matter what it costs her, she will pay off all the debts of the Rudion Duchy. Exhaling, he finished by saying that she had asked him to trust her, and then the family's devoted assistant had said that it was impossible, explaining that she might demand that they then pay this debt to her personally, and the interest would be even higher than the current ones. At that moment, the head maid, Adelia, came in and angrily asked the assistant to stop talking such nonsense about the mistress. She had just brought tea to the head and heard every word the butler said, so she said that Madam was really concerned about well-being. Then, turning to the assistant, she asked how he dared compare the lady to a greedy moneylender. Interrupting this conversation, the Duke firmly said that now was not the best time for arguments. After all, Madam ordered that he be immediately informed and that the accounting books be brought, and he asked where she was. Once in the office, our heroine started coughing because there was a lot of dust there, like in a long-forgotten place. It became clear to her why this room had been bypassed when they were showing her the castle, but she couldn't have imagined that everything was so neglected. But, on the other hand, there is no one to blame, because this room had been empty for a long time, and there was no owner who would use it. Then she wondered where the butler had disappeared to, since he had run so quickly to Euclid, and she had been counting on a quick answer. Hearing the door open, she thought that it was probably the butler who had returned, whom she was already tired of waiting for here. However, it was the Duke who came to personally talk to his wife and try to dissuade her from her plan. The butler was horrified the office was much dirtier than he had expected, and if he had known, he would have invited her here after cleaning. The Duke apologized, explaining that this was obviously due to a shortage of servants and they were unable to clean the castle daily. He added that, of course, from now on, during seasonal work, they will definitely clean up here and do wet cleaning regularly. Jane replied, and yet, to prevent the estate from falling into disrepair during the seasonal cleaning, it is better to clean out every hidden corner, cleaning everything thoroughly and in one go, and she believes that they will now be able to afford it once they pay off their debts. Then he said that he had come just to discuss this matter because he had been informed that she intended to pay off her debts with her dowry. When she replied that everything was correct, the Duke asked her to change her mind and not make such a hasty decision. Jane asked why he was asking her this, to which the Duke replied that he found it rather difficult to put into words. And he looked like a man who didn't want to talk about something, but she needed to get an answer. She asked what was the matter with her reputation. He was afraid that her help in paying off the debt could harm the honor of his family. The Duke assured her that this was not the case at all, and our heroine began to insist that he not hide the real reason from her. He replied that he felt it would be too much of a burden, and that he was afraid she would overdo it by becoming the mistress of the family. After considering his answer, she asked him if he didn't think he was burdening other people in this way, and not her at all. She didn't want to be harsh with him, but looking at his composure, she involuntarily began to speak in a completely alien and cold voice. She said she thought they had to face reality now, and she was afraid she had been pushing him too hard. Euclid, saying that he understood what she was getting at, suggested that they formalize it as a loan, and he would repay her monthly. Jane didn't like the idea of her taking a percentage from him, but he said that even between spouses, things should be transparent. Having said that she was categorically against it, she continued that if they did so, it would look as if he was drawing a line between them. It's as if she's afraid that her contribution will turn into shackles if the relationship suddenly deteriorates, but she decided to say it out loud if they get divorced. When he protested, Jane reminded him that her name was now Rudion, and she couldn't stand idly by while debts dragged her down. He tried to refuse again, but she said that she was adamant, and if he persisted, it meant that he did not respect her as a wife. Our heroine continued that this, in turn, would be a violation of the wedding vow to respect and honor her for the rest of their days. The Duke had no choice but to agree, but he asked her to take into account that he had no bad intentions whatsoever. Thinking that she had won this argument, she only then noticed the servants who were pretending not to have seen anything. Then she said that it was too dusty here and that it was harmful to health, and suggested continuing the conversation in the fresh air. The butler supported them by saying that they were extremely concerned about their health and asked them to talk outside while they cleaned up. He gently but insistently suggested that they go out into the fresh air, as if he understood everything and wanted to help them avoid unnecessary complications. At this point, Delano spoke up. He had something to tell her, and said that she was the true benefactress of the Rudion family. The original stated that in a noble society mired in luxury and vanity, Euclid's capable assistant was accustomed to something different. But once he found himself in the harsh and poor north, he had to endure a lot of grief, but his trials did not end there. He soon encountered a new obstacle, and the name of this difficulty was Lady Basil. Having heard enough ominous rumors, where every story he heard from those around him made his heart pound anxiously, he imagined her image in the most terrible perspectives, and fear gripped him more and more each day, and he was afraid of meeting her. But, having become an involuntary witness to a very emotional conversation between his master and his wife, Delano changed his mind. His mistrust of Jane evaporated of its own accord, and he suddenly realized that his previous doubts and suspicions had been nothing but empty guesses. Delano decided to put his prejudices aside, trusting what he saw now, and declared with complete sincerity that she was their new hope. Our heroine could not figure out what had suddenly happened to him. She was overcome by a mixed feeling of surprise and anxiety. And he continued that if she needed anything, she could contact him personally with any question and at any time. After asking him to help her tidy up her office, she realized that the people here were not at all what she had imagined them to be. The next day, Delano told her that he couldn't believe his eyes how so many documents had been reduced to one sheet overnight. And when he asked if they really kept accounting books so masterfully in the Duchy of Basil, Jane replied that one could say so. He added that from now on, it would be better to prepare the castle's financial reports in this way, and that if he had any questions, he could confidently contact her. She also said that their first priority would be paying off their debts, and then they would gradually get down to the plan for the development of the duchy. Delano wondered where these ridiculous rumors about the lady, who was the very embodiment of professionalism, came from. Jane thought she was a little taken aback that the financial gap here was deeper than she expected, but there was a silver lining. The duchy had profitable mines and promising lands, so once they had paid off their debts, they would be able to breathe freely. Moreover, most of her dowry will be liquid assets that can be easily converted into cash. She told her assistant that the key question was how quickly and efficiently she could manage her dowry. And I thought that Anne had always been a master at finding channels for purchases, so she would certainly cope brilliantly with the sale of property. Our heroine wanted to immediately ask the maid to take care of this issue, but remembered that she was cleaning the bedroom. Anne also apologized to her if any inconvenience occurred, but Jane did not understand that it could take so long to clean the bedroom. And since the maid was absent, our heroine told Delano that he shouldn't worry about the fate of the assets. Everything could be resolved. In response, Delano said that if there was an opportunity, he would like to help her and learn a lot from her in the process. And he asked if she would allow him to gain such an invaluable experience, and she gave her consent. From that day on, he would help her. Inspired by this answer, he thanked her and added that he could not believe that such a woman was in their area. At that moment, Euclid entered the office, and our heroine, thinking that this was her main reason for joy, asked if he had eaten. His answer was that he had indeed already had a hearty lunch, and afterwards he apologized to her for having to go to the dining room alone. Then she replied that it was okay. She herself said that she would have a snack while working, and, in general, when she was busy with work, she was even too lazy to eat. The Duke remarked that this was a very bad habit and asked her never to skip meals in the future. Having promised her favorite to try, she thought that he even frowned so caringly that she could not refuse him. Then she said that if everything goes according to plan, and the debts are paid off before it is time to pay the interest for the next month. And he told her that they had brought the ingredients for her favorite desserts, and if she wished, he would tell the cook to serve them on the table. She thought she might invite the children to share a meal with her, since she hadn't seen them for several days due to work. She was so eager to see Marianne and Dior devouring the sweets that she told the Duke that she would speak to the maid herself. She added that she just needed to unwind a bit, and then Euclid replied that in that case he didn't dare object. Jane thought, well, she can't admit that she dreams of having a cozy tea party with her nephews. She said out loud that he could use some rest, that he had spent the whole night working on papers and looked completely exhausted. She thought that she could allow herself to get tired, but she would not allow her favorite to bring himself to complete exhaustion. The Duke did not try to dissuade her, especially since he had indeed had to work a lot in the last few days, and he was tired. And in his condition, this was not good for him. But on the other hand, he did not want to hand over all the affairs of the duchy to his wife. Lady Bercy said that since the Duchess had already examined all the ledgers, she now finally realized what a hole she had fallen into. She continued thinking out loud that it must be why she didn't show her face at dinner. She was probably just scared. Her thoughts were about how much of this colossal debt she would be able to pay off, even if Jane managed to get her affairs in order. However, no matter how much she paid, the monthly logistics bills from Count Burrs would never go away, because he was so petty. She thought that her father could have reduced the fare for transportation, or even better, demanded an exemption from duties in exchange for marrying her. Afterwards, she wondered if they really had their wedding night. She wondered why everything had gone so quietly and unnoticed. This led Lady Bercy to think that perhaps the relationship between the Duke and his wife had completely deteriorated. She said out loud that if that were the case, then you see, in a month or even a week, Jane would declare that she could not live like this and would run away from the castle. Dior wondered if his aunt would leave because he had said something nasty, since in fact he didn't consider her a bad person at all. Lady Bercy asked where the toys from that room had gone, and Marianne replied that the maids had put them away because they did not play with them. Their aunt was unhappy about this, as the maids should have asked her permission first before throwing it away. She believed that the servants should not touch them, but she was going to kill time with the toys. Her gaze fell on the mound next to her nephew, and she sternly asked what they were hiding from her there. Dior was so scared and confused that he simply couldn't find what to answer. He and his sister didn't expect the toy to be discovered. It was a teddy bear, the very prize that our heroine won in one of the lotteries on the way to the castle. Meanwhile, Lady Bercy, having asked where they got it from, took it in her hands and then discovered that a real emerald was hanging on the bear cub. She asked how much such a toy might cost and did not expect anyone to answer 15 gold pieces. Having long since become accustomed to feeling like the full-fledged mistress of this estate, I didn't even immediately realize that there was someone else in the room. When she realized what she had answered, she turned her head and asked what kind of toy it was that it cost a fortune. Then Lady Bercy let out a somewhat belated cry of fear, which seriously frightened her already alarmed nephews. But not our heroine, who, taking a step forward, said, "Oh my God, what a noise, and what is causing such astonishment?" Adding, "You think a trinket for some 15 gold, and is it really worth reacting so violently because of it?" Looking at her nephews, Jane noticed that they were looking at her with such relief, as if they had been relieved of a burden. Those little glances told her more than words, and she was glad that she had finally managed to win their trust. But there was also, undoubtedly, the fact that they had been clearly scared to death by Amy's presence, and now they had calmed down a little. Therefore, she said that a person's speech is a direct reflection of his nobility, and she asks the lady to be more careful in her words in front of children. Then, without saying a word, our heroine took the toy because she believed that Lady Bercy was not worthy of her gifts. It also didn't escape her discerning eye that the rest of her gifts for her nephews were not in the children's room. Turning to Dior, she said that she was sincerely glad that he liked this teddy bear. But in this world there are too many shameless people whose hearts are full of greed for other people's goods, so let him take care of it properly. He replied that he would do so, and Jane said that she did not see the other gifts that she had brought them except for this toy. She added that she didn't know their tastes, so she prepared a little bit of everything, but next time they would choose something together. If they want something else besides toys, they shouldn't be shy, but tell her, because from now on, a lot will change. You won't have to wait or travel to buy things, because a branch of the Basil Guild will soon open in the north. When she announced this news, she understood that this branch would not please Lady Bercy. The Count certainly did not expect the emergence of competitors. The Burse Guild was essentially a monopoly in the north, and judging by the documents she had studied, kept everyone on a tight rein. Keeping the malice out of her voice, Jane asked if that wasn't wonderful news. After all, now, even in the north, any goods from the capital or other lands can be delivered quickly and without unnecessary hassle. Lady Bercy said that she had suddenly remembered an urgent matter and asked permission to take her leave. Our heroine, watching her go, thought that the Bercy family had long enjoyed a comfortable life, maintaining a monopoly on northern goods. However, their golden age is over and it is time for them to start preparing for the consequences that are sure to come. A few hours later, Jane watched her nieces devouring the sweets, and her soul sang with joy. They looked so cute. However, now that she could get a better look at them, they seemed painfully thin, albeit charming. But during the growth period, it is vital for children to be stronger and healthier, because it is at this time that the foundations of their future are laid. Jane remembered Lady Birth's poisonous speeches, and the fact that there was not a soul from the servants near the children. All these facts did not give her peace. She had seen enough two-faced people to the point of nausea, especially those who unashamedly hide behind the sacred name of the family. She wanted to know what the children themselves thought, so she asked if they had a good relationship with Aunt Amy. The nephews replied that they were good and that their aunt visited them almost every day, but Jane didn't really believe them. That's why she made them promise that if what happened today happened again, they would immediately tell her. She didn't say it out loud, but she firmly decided to herself that she could immediately protect them and help solve the problem. Her premonitions were not deceiving her. However, the state of the children, this strange connection with the Bursa house, there was clearly something more here. And not just debt obligations, our heroine felt in her gut that some dark secret was hidden here. The maid, saying that they had been waiting for her, asked if Madame looked gloomier than usual and whether something was really bothering her that much. Jane responded by saying that while going through the accounts, she had come across one curious detail. Count Bursa's affairs seemed dubious to her. Although the Count's family are related to the Duke's nephews on his mother's side, the Duke pays huge sums every month. And all this is under the pretext of transport costs, and even taking into account the cost of delivery, these amounts seem unreasonably inflated. Especially considering that 10 years ago, when the Count's tyranny provoked the people's anger, Euclid's late brother acted as a mediator. Perhaps this agreement had been an act of gross injustice from the very beginning, and Anne fully agreed with the lady. Jane added that House Bierce had been shipping essential goods to the north for years, but the guild had never been able to expand, and it is quite possible that a secret deal was made during the negotiations, or that there are other problems hidden from view. She found it especially suspicious that soon after this agreement was concluded, Euclid's brother married the Count's daughter. I thought that, however, the dead could no longer be called to account, but sooner or later this problem would disappear with the arrival of the Basil Guild to the north. Then the maid suggested turning to the young Duke Sional, adding that she understood that this might be unpleasant for the lady. But Sional is in the Ministry of Finance, and his responsibilities include combating unfair competition and secret conspiracies. Here, Jane added that they say that before the Burses started charging for logistics, prices skyrocketed, although that was a long time ago. I wondered if the Empire had laws regulating the activities of guilds. Why did House Rudion come to an agreement with the Count? There was also Euclid's inexplicable reluctance to remain in the capital and the complete lack of support for the North from the imperial court. Our heroine asked out loud whether the imperial family really hated the Rudion ducal house so much. Anne said that was what was really troubling her mistress, and to tell the truth, she had some information on the matter. She said that many are already beginning to suspect that the Emperor is secretly launching attacks on the north, but is unable to carry out open attacks. So she simply ignores it, secretly wishing for the Rudion house to collapse as soon as possible, then suddenly falls silent, asking whether it is worth talking about it at all. She added that, to be honest, she exaggerated a bit, but our heroine already wanted to know everything to the very end. Gressel said that he had been observing the knightly order, and that officially the post of commander was empty, and there was not a single real knight. Only a couple of dozen squires and those who still dream of becoming knights, and the Duke personally set the duty schedule. And this semblance of a detachment takes turns guarding the castle, and as far as he understands, they train independently. Jane said that the Duke's debts were already a heavy burden, and now the castle's security was hanging by a thread. To which Gressel replied that he too was concerned, but during the investigation he discovered that the castle itself was a magical fortress. It was created by the first head of the house with the greatest skill, but even the oldest servants do not know how to set the mechanisms in motion. Our heroine was very worried about all this news, and it did not allow her to calm down. Something had to be done. An idea came to her mind, which she hastened to share with her faithful servants, and they happily supported her. Jane even became a little worried about them. They looked so inspired at that moment. Anne said that in that case she would contact Black tomorrow, although, to tell the truth, everyone was extremely puzzled by this sudden marriage. She continued that, if we confess, Golda also really wants to see Madame and asked if they could come to the castle to pay their respects. Left alone, our heroine decided to sum up everything that had happened up to this point. She instructed the maid to hire mercenaries and Gressel to lead the nightly order so as not to worry about the security of the castle. At the same time, I decided to send Cyanal documents about Count Burz's deliveries to make sure that there were no problems with the contract. After the wedding, she planned to stay away from the Basil family, but in the current situation, their support turned out to be a help. The maid had no idea that she had thrown her mistress into complete disarray. For this, Jane knew nothing of either black or gold, and she was at a loss to understand why Anne thought that it was too early to contact the Gold Guild and that she would only contact the Black Guild. She couldn't ask directly, so she had no choice but to hope that everything would become clear someday. Feeling incredibly tired from all these thoughts, I decided to give up and take a warm bath to relax. She thought the maid had already prepared everything, but she said that she would have let her know as soon as everything was ready. Remembering that Anne had spent almost 2 days tidying up the bedroom, he thanked her for doing a great job with the wardrobe. When the maid asked if the mistress wanted to see, she wondered if she really had to do it, as she was already sure that everything was fine. But for some reason, Anne began to insist and pulled her along with her and led her to the wall, on which our heroine saw nothing but a clock. Jane was already in the mood to relax in the bath, so she had no idea what kind of manipulations the maid was doing with the watch. Meanwhile, she was saying that first you need to turn the hands 3 times counterclockwise and then knock twice on the cabinet next to it. Our heroine was stunned with surprise. The door of a secret room opened in front of her. What is happening? She thought. She felt goosebumps running across her skin and her heart beating faster with excitement and a slight tremor. Her whole skin seemed to be filled with a strange tension, and inside there arose a feeling of something unusual happening. There was an unusual silence inside, and it was an exact replica of her dressing room from Duke Basil's estate. At that moment, Jane was horrified by the realization that Anne had set up a secret room in the Duke of Rudian's castle. However, later I thought that, judging by how skillfully everything was prepared, that Jane herself had given the maid instructions and for a long time already. And just as our heroine calmed down internally, she became agitated again when her gaze fell on one thing. There was no doubt about it, but it was the same pattern that was on the bag she had given to Richard that day. Thoughts came flooding back to her. Anne had mentioned a certain black guild earlier, as if everyone had decided to constantly remind her of Richard. Moreover, this time, much earlier than in the original, she filled his wallet with her savings to the brim. Reflecting further, she came to the conclusion that by this time, he must have already subjugated the criminal world. But how exactly this actually happened, she, of course, could not know, and it all began in the lair of the Assassin's Guild. His attack was sudden, so he managed to break through the first line of defense quite easily and even acquire a weapon. And although there were shouts demanding that this scoundrel be stopped, he continued to confidently advance towards the main building. A man was watching him from inside, and at some point thought that the attacker wasn't even using the weapon he had taken from him. And he doesn't inflict serious wounds, limiting himself to just bruises, as if he were just playing a game and not fighting for something important. They were prepared thanks to the leader's warning, but who would have thought that they would be so helpless? A truly outstanding master, and the leader probably just wanted to test their vigilance, and it is worth learning a lesson from this. Soon everything was finished. The man only had to wait for this young and cold-blooded master to come inside. He didn't have to wait long for this, and Richard appeared on the threshold. Yes, it was him, and the guild leader had warned the guild about him. The killer never questioned the head's decision if she said they needed this person, then that's exactly how it was. He dropped to one knee and said that the chief had ordered them to honor Master Richard as their master when he came. Richard clarified that the man meant his mistress, and he confidently replied that everything was correct. This is how one of the original's main characters joined the guild and asked when he could meet the owner. Our heroine woke up in a cold sweat. She had a very strange dream, and she felt uneasy. She thought that perhaps she had dreamed all this only because she had thought too much about Richard yesterday. At first, she didn't even pay attention to it, but now she remembered what guild the maid was talking about. As far as she remembered, in the original, the Assassin's Guild where Richard was the master had exactly the same name, Black. She wondered if this could be a simple coincidence, or if everything that was happening was connected, but still hidden from her understanding. At that moment, Anne came in and reported that the Black Guild had been suddenly attacked at dawn that day. And they say that the man who committed such a daring act became their new master. Gressel asked what kind of impudent person dared to do such a thing. Anne asked him to watch his language, and the knight said that she herself said that he had become their master, which meant that Black now belonged to him. Laughing, she replied that how could that be possible, since they had all sworn allegiance to Madame long before he had done so. Then the maid continued that although the plan had to be put a little ahead of schedule, the mistress had taken care of everything in advance. The knight said that he knew it, which meant that Madame had foreseen everything, and Jane thought that it seemed as if she had just opened Pandora's box. But was it really worth touching him, she thought, because she just wanted to live happily ever after with Euclid? I swore to myself that I would never open this Pandora's box until there was an urgent need for it. She desperately wanted to calm her soul and body, so she remembered her nephews who were like little sons. She remembered that the butler had mentioned that children often came to the library to read, and she thought about talking to them about Euclid. However, there was no one in the library, and she was about to go look for the children elsewhere when she saw the clock. Looking at them, I thought that these seemed to be in a completely inappropriate place who puts clocks between bookshelves. She was even a little amused by her own guess, because behind them there could also be a secret room or some kind of passage. For a few seconds she stood in confusion. She couldn't believe that the entire castle was strewn with secret passages, hidden from prying eyes. She wondered if maybe she should take a risk and head out into the unknown, and in the end, curiosity got the better of her. At first only a crack appeared, but after pushing the wall harder, our heroine found herself on the threshold of a long tunnel. Her heart began to beat faster as she realized that she was faced with a difficult choice, and she had to decide whether to enter or retreat. Her anxiety grew, because these hidden passages could lead to unknown and dangerous places, and she began to think. She had heard that Duke Rudian's castle was considered a magical fortress, but she never thought that she would suddenly discover a secret passage like this. The darkness lingered with the smell of damp stone dust and the reflection of occasional drops dripping from the ceiling, but she was curious about what was inside. It looked creepy, but she couldn't pass by. What if there was gold, diamonds, or other countless treasures ahead? But no, it looked like there was a treasure chest hidden here. Apparently it really was a simple secret passage. However, the history of her past world also spoke of castles that always had secret escape routes in case of emergency. These passages became a kind of protection, allowing one to hide in difficult times and disappear from sight, like ghosts. Jane saw a door ahead and stopped, hesitant to enter without asking, and was about to knock. Her hand trembled and she raised it, intending to knock to gain permission to enter or to find out who was hiding behind that door. However, a voice came from behind the door. Blood is thicker than water, and it is immediately obvious that you crawled out of the womb of a worthless swindler. Our heroine recognized its owner, who continued that they had to convey her words to the Duke as befits. Then this woman would never have become a duchess, and the Basil Guild would not have been allowed to open a branch in these lands. She told them to go quickly and say that they did not want to see traitors here, or that they should continue to pay their allowance regularly. Lady Bercy continued her speech, saying that their late father had promised to do this for the rest of his life. Marianne squeezed her brother's hand tightly and remembered Aunt Jane's words. She asked her to tell her if something like this happened again. The young lady remembered her promise, and feeling Aunt Jane's support, she replied that she did not want to do that. Amy thought she had misheard, but Marianne repeated that she did not want to and would not tell her uncle what she told her to tell him. Then Lady Bercy asked why Marianne thought so much of herself just because the woman had shown a little kindness. And once the aunt finds out who they are, she will stop considering them people, and the uncle will stop considering them nephews when the truth comes out. She continued furiously, asking if everything was clear to them and that they should not stand there like pillars, but should quickly go and quickly do what they were told. Her speech was suddenly interrupted by our heroine, who knocked Amy down with one blow, asking if she had been there all this time. This is how she abused the children and how long it has been going on, and our heroine's eyes filled with righteous anger. She knew that she could no longer tolerate the injustice and had to do everything possible to stop this tyranny. With this thought in her heart, she felt determination boiling inside her, and self-confidence became her support. Jane was ready to tear this unbearable woman to pieces, but she suddenly said that it turns out she doesn't understand everything correctly. It was the height of impudence how Lady Burse allowed herself to smile, as if the truth were actually on her side. Amy thought that why should she suddenly justify herself because she did what she thought was right, and she was not going to listen to anyone. So she asked why Jane cared about it anyway, since she had married the Duke anyway, while loving another man. Then our heroine demanded that he stop talking this nonsense, and then asked why Lady Bercy assumed that she loved another. Without waiting for an answer, she asked another question. But even if that were the case, wasn't she the Duchess of Rudion? Wasn't she the aunt of these children? She doesn't know what secret is hidden, but even if they are not related, did Amy really think that she would let her get away with such treatment? At that moment, she wanted to hear everything from her nephews, so she asked if Aunt Amy had ever abused them. When Dion replied that they were often pinched, our heroine thought that she wanted more than just a pinch in return that wouldn't be enough. I wanted to repay this debt tenfold, but I stopped myself because showing violence is not the best example for children. With an incredible effort of will, she pulled herself together, concentrated on calmness, and tried to maintain her dignity. She was aware of the impact her behavior was having on the young listeners and told Amy to get out of here. This time, Lady Bercy did not show her character. She believed that she would still have an opportunity to get revenge for this moment. Jane apologized to the children, asking why they must have been very scared, and added that everything would be fine now. Mariana, almost in tears, asked not to tell her uncle anything about this, so that it would remain a secret. However, our heroine believed that she should first find out about everything, and only then would she be able to understand how best to proceed. The niece said that in fact their mother was not from the birth family, she was a commoner, and not the Count's niece at all. Then Jane thought that if everything came to the bottom of it, the blame for all this lay with Euclid's older brother. After all, he knew that she was a commoner, but he still insisted on marriage, and in order to keep the secret, he agreed to a deal with the Count. With this decision, the elder brother placed an unbearable financial burden not only on the family, but on the entire estate. She continued to think silently, and the young lady, becoming agitated, asked if this meant they could no longer call her aunt. Asking what nonsense was going on, Jane said they could continue calling her aunt, no matter what she had just learned. The children looked at her in surprise, and she continued that this was all wonderful, because now they knew something. Now they know that they have nothing in common with these evil blackmailers, and isn't that a reason to rejoice? Then Marianne very quietly asked that they were not aristocrats, to which the Duchess asked them in return where they got that idea from. And she explained that they were born in a legal marriage and officially entered into the family tree of Duke Rudion. Suddenly the girl burst into tears, and through her tears she said that they were a burden to her uncle, and with these words, Jane was extremely surprised. Having calmed Marianne down, she asked if they really thought so, adding that if so, she would be disappointed. Dior said they tried very hard not to cause problems for their uncle, and never said anything about how nice it would be if Amy became their aunt. He continued that they were silent even when Amy was screaming and angry. They really wanted to have lunch with her and her uncle together in the dining room. When he added that they had wanted to ask their uncle to take them for a walk together, but had remained silent, Jane said that they were not a burden to the Duke. And she can tell them for sure that, despite all his busy schedule, he always tries to spend time with them over lunch. She then told her nephews that wherever their uncle was, he always hurried to return to the estate so as not to be separated from them for long. And even if he finds out everything they told her today, he will never stop considering them his nephews. Because they are Euclid's precious family, and that is something they should remember and not think about any nonsense anymore. Although tears still glistened on the children's cheeks, Jane detected awkward hope and genuine joy in their voices. Hugging them, our heroine thought how it was possible to hurt such little ones, because these little souls deserve love and protection. And she promised herself that she would definitely return this debt with interest, since Amy dared to encroach on her happy family life.